My name is Jada, and at 34 years old, I have learned that silence is the loudest form of power. But my family, the illustrious Otis clan of Atlanta, never understood silence. They only understood noise, flash, and optics. This story begins 48 hours before the truck stopped inside the VIP waiting room of Henderson and Associates. The air smelled of mahogany old leather, and my family's desperate need for validation. I sat in the far corner tapping away on my phone, debugging a line of code for a cloud architecture project. I was wearing my usual uniform, a heather gray hoodie that cost $400, but looked like something from a thrift store to the untrained eye paired with jeans and sneakers. To my left, occupying the center of the room like royalty, sat my parents Desmond and Patricia, and the golden couple, my younger sister Bianca, and her husband Preston. They were a kaleidoscope of logos: Gucci belts, Prada loafers, and enough jewelry to sink a small boat. They were nervous, but they masked it with arrogance. Preston, the man my sister married because he had a trust fund surname, despite having an empty bank account, leaned over the armrest of his leather chair. He looked at me, then looked at the door, then back at me with that smirk I had wanted to wipe off his face for 5 years. "Hey, Jada," he said, his voice loud enough to make the receptionist look up. "Did security actually let you in looking like that? Or did they think you were here to deliver our lunch order?" Bianca giggled, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. "Preston, stop it. She is just trying to be authentically tech. You know the starving artist look, even though she is 34. I did not look up from my screen. I did not blink. I simply finished typing the command syntax and hit enter. In my head, I calculated that Preston's suit was a season old and ill-fitting at the shoulders, likely bought on credit. "I am actually here to watch you all perform," I said, my voice flat. "It is rare to see a circus act this close up without buying a ticket." My mother Patricia sighed loudly, adjusting the silk scarf around her neck. "Jada, please. Today is about your grandfather's legacy. Just for once, could you try not to look like you fix cable boxes for a living? We are meeting with Mr. Henderson. Appearances matter. Perception is reality." I almost laughed. Perception was their reality. My reality was binary, ones and zeros, true and false. And looking at them all, I saw was a fatal error waiting to crash. Just then, the double oak doors opened. Lawyer Henderson walked in. He was a tall man with silver hair, the only person in this building who knew who I really was. He had been my grandfather's best friend, and the only other person who knew that Nexus Flow, the software running half the logistics companies in North America, was built by the girl in the gray hoodie. He walked straight toward me, his hand extended, a genuine smile on his face. "Jada, it is good to see you. It is good to—" Before I could stand, my father, Desmond, intercepted him. He physically stepped in front of me, blocking Mr. Henderson's path, and grabbed the lawyer's hand for a vigorous shake. It was a power move so transparent, it was embarrassing. "Mr. Henderson, good to see you," my father boomed, his voice projecting as if he were addressing a shareholder meeting. "We are all eager to get this started. The future of Otis Logistics is ready to take the helm." He gestured grandly toward Bianca, who struck a pose that looked rehearsed for Instagram. Henderson looked at my father, then glanced over my father's shoulder at me. I gave him a subtle nod, a silent code. "Let them have their show." "Of course," Desmond Henderson said, his tone cooling. "Please, everyone, come into the boardroom." As we filed in, my father placed a heavy hand on Bianca's shoulder, leaning down to whisper loudly enough for me to hear. "You see, Bianca, that is respect. You look the part, you get the part. Your sister could be a genius, but she dresses like the help. No one trusts a person who cannot present themselves with dignity." My mother chimed in, linking arms with Bianca. "Exactly. Jada has always been mechanical. She lacks the sophistication to navigate our world. She is better off in the background dealing with wires and plugs. You, my darling, are the face. And the face must always be flawless." I walked behind them, listening to their heels click against the marble floor. They talked about sophistication and dignity while preparing to spend money they had not earned. They called me mechanical. They called me the help. They had no idea that in the modern world, the person who controls the wires and plugs is the person who controls the oxygen. I took my seat at the far end of the long boardroom table. Preston pulled out a chair for Bianca, but let the door almost slam in my face. I sat down, opened my laptop, and waited. The show was about to begin, and I had a front row seat to their destruction. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. The sound was dry like paper rubbing against stone. It was the only warning we got before the avalanche of wealth began to fall. My parents leaned forward in unison, a synchronized movement of greed. My mother, Patricia, clutched her diamond-encrusted handbag so tightly her knuckles turned white. My father, Desmond, had a bead of sweat rolling down his temple despite the chill of the air conditioning. They were hungry, starving for the validation that only a 9-figure inheritance could provide. Bianca sat between them, vibrating with anticipation like a child waiting for a birthday cake. Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses and began to read. To my granddaughter Bianca, whom I hope will one day understand the weight of responsibility, I leave the entirety of my real estate portfolio. This includes the primary estate in Buckhead with its 12 bedrooms and 6 acres of manicured gardens valued at $15 million. My mother let out a strangled sob of joy, clutching her chest, as if she had just won a marathon she did not run. That house was her obsession. She had spent years trying to redecorate it in her mind while my grandfather was still alive. But Henderson continued, his voice relentless. Next, I leave the 3 central distribution hubs located in the Tri-County area, spanning 50 hectares of industrial land essential to the supply chain of the Southeast. And most importantly, the operational heart of our legacy, the entire fleet of 500 Peterbilt semi-trucks and the legal entity known as Otis Logistics. Effective immediately, Bianca Otis shall assume the title of Chief Executive Officer with full decision-making power. The silence that followed lasted exactly 1 second before it was shattered. Bianca screamed. It was not a scream of grief or gratitude. It was the shrill, ear-piercing shriek of someone who had just won the lottery. She jumped up from her leather chair, her $20,000 dress swishing around her legs. "Oh my God," she yelled, throwing her hands in the air. "I knew it. I knew Grandpa knew I was the special one." She did not hug our parents. She did not thank the lawyer. She did not even look at her husband, Preston. Instead, she did what she was born to do. She reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and opened Instagram Live within 3 seconds. "Hey guys," she shouted at the screen, her voice shifting instantly into that fake, polished influencer tone you hear on social media. "It is official. I am literally shaking right now. I am the new CEO of Otis Logistics. We are talking 500 trucks, mansions, the whole empire. Get ready because I'm about to change the game. Trucking is going to be so chic." My father stood up and clapped, beaming as if watching a prodigy perform. "That is my girl," he announced, looking at Henderson with smug satisfaction. "See, Henderson, she has the charisma. She is a natural leader. The market responds to energy like that." Preston leaned over to me, his breath smelling of expensive coffee and entitlement. "You hear that, Jada? Your baby sister is the boss now. Try not to be too jealous. Maybe she will hire you to clean the tires if you beg." I said nothing. I sat perfectly still, watching Bianca pose for selfies with the legal documents, duck lips, and peace signs on full display. She had the trucks, she had the land, she had the title. But as I watched her preen for her followers, I felt a cold, dark amusement settle in my chest. She thought she had won the kingdom. She had no idea she had just inherited a corpse. Mr. Henderson adjusted his silk tie and looked down at the document again. He seemed to hesitate for a fraction of a second, his eyes darting toward me with a look that might have been pity or might have been a suppressed smile. The room went quiet, but the energy was different. It was no longer the electric anticipation of wealth. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of judgment. The main course had been served to Bianca, and now it was time for the scraps. My father leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms as if bracing himself for disappointment. Henderson cleared his throat and read in a lower, more monotone voice. Regarding my granddaughter Jada, who has always marched to the beat of her own drum, I leave the contents of the sub-basement utility room, specifically the singular server rack unit and the outdated computer hardware contained therein. Additionally, I grant her full ownership and intellectual property rights to any and all personal hobby projects she has developed on said machinery. The silence stretched for a moment as they processed the words. Then Preston let out a snort that turned into a full-blown guffaw. He slapped his hand on the mahogany table, shaking his head in disbelief. "You have got to be kidding me," he choked out between laughs. "The old man left you a heater. That is what that thing is, basically a giant loud space heater. I bet if you haul it to a scrapyard, you might get $50 for the copper wire. Do not spend it all in one place, Jada." The laughter was contagious. My mother covered a smile with her hand while my father just shook his head, looking at the floor as if I were a stain on the carpet he could not scrub out. Bianca did not laugh loud like Preston. She offered a tight, condescending smile, the kind you give to a charity case. "Well, actually, that works out perfectly," she said, smoothing the fabric of her dress. "I was planning to renovate the basement anyway. That ugly humming box takes up so much space and uses way too much electricity. I'm going to turn that room into a temperature-controlled wine cellar. So really, Jada, you are doing me a favor by hauling your trash out of my new house." Henderson looked at me, waiting for a reaction, waiting for me to fight for a share of the millions, or at least show some anger. But I did not feel anger. I felt the cold steel of victory sliding into my hand. They heard trash. I heard leverage. They heard hobby projects. I heard the proprietary source code for the most advanced logistics algorithm in the country. I looked Henderson in the eye and spoke clearly so there would be no confusion on the recording. "I accept the inheritance exactly as written. I will remove my equipment within 24 hours. My father let out a long sigh of relief. "Good. At least you are not making a scene. Now let us go celebrate the real future of this family." The heavy Mont Blanc pen scratched across the legal documents with a sound that felt like a knife cutting through fabric. Bianca signed her name with a flourish, adding a little heart over the letter I, as if she were signing a yearbook instead of a multi-million-dollar corporate transfer. She dropped the pen on the mahogany table and leaned back, crossing her arms. She was officially the CEO of Otis Logistics. She looked around the boardroom, savoring the moment before her gaze landed on me like a predator spotting a wounded animal. "Jada," she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "As my first executive order, I have made a decision regarding company assets. I am going to need you to vacate the downtown apartment by tomorrow morning." I blinked. The downtown apartment was not just my home. It was the nerve center for the company's entire network. It was hardwired into the city's main fiber optic grid to ensure zero latency for the tracking systems. "Bianca," I said slowly, trying to use small words, "that apartment is not just a living space. It contains the redundancy nodes for the fleet. I monitor the server traffic from there 24/7. If I leave, the real-time tracking goes dark." Bianca rolled her eyes and inspected her fingernails. "You are so dramatic, Jada. It is an apartment, not the Pentagon. And frankly, it is wasted on you. You keep the blinds closed all day. Do you know how good the natural light is in that living room? It is perfect for my new day in the life of a CEO TikTok series. I need that space for content creation. You can find a basement somewhere that suits your vampire lifestyle better." I looked at my father, expecting him to intervene. He knew, or at least he should have known, that the apartment was classified as an IT infrastructure site. But he just nodded along with his favorite daughter. "Bianca is right, Jada," he said, pouring himself a glass of scotch. "A CEO needs a residence that reflects the brand. You have been squatting there for free long enough. It is time you pay your own rent like an adult." "But who will manage the system?" I asked, my voice rising just an octave. "The software requires manual overrides during peak hours. You cannot just unplug the architect from the architecture." My mother Patricia laughed. It was a sharp, dismissive sound. "Oh, stop trying to make yourself sound important. It is just computers, Jada. It is typing. We can hire some college student to sit in a cubicle and push buttons for minimum wage. We do not need you living in a luxury penthouse to reset a password. Preston chimed in, leaning forward. Yeah, Jada. I have a nephew who is good at Fortnite. He can probably do your job in his sleep. Just leave the keys on the counter and clean the place up. I do not want to see any of your nerd wires lying around. I looked at them, really looked at them. They were not just cruel, they were dangerously stupid. They were about to sever the connection between the brain and the body of the company because they wanted better lighting for social media. I stood up. I did not fight. I did not beg. I simply nodded. Understood, I said. I will be out by noon tomorrow. I walked out of that boardroom without looking back. They thought they were evicting a tenant. They had no idea they were evicting the only pilot capable of flying their plane. The valet looked at my Honda like it was a disease. I parked it myself around the back near the dumpsters. From here, I had a perfect view of the window table at Le Jardin. It was the most expensive restaurant in Atlanta, the kind of place where a salad cost more than my weekly groceries used to. But tonight, my parents were not worried about the bill. They had $130 million to burn. I watched them through the windshield. It was like watching a silent movie. My father stood up, tapping a spoon against his crystal flute. He was making a speech. I could imagine the words: legacy, future, Bianca. He placed a hand on my sister's shoulder, and she beamed, fake tears glistening in her eyes. The waiter poured another round of Dom Perignon. They were celebrating the death of my grandfather by spending his money on fermented grapes and ego. They had not explicitly told me I could not come. They just forgot to mention the reservation time or the location. When we left the lawyer's office, my mother simply said, "We are going to grab a bite. You probably have work to do, Jada. You know how you get with your little computer projects." It was a dismissal wrapped in a casual observation. They wanted to celebrate, and my presence would only remind them of the one thing they wanted to ignore: the truth. I reached into the passenger seat and grabbed my dinner, a protein bar and a bottle of lukewarm water. I took a bite, chewing slowly as I watched Preston order for the table. He was gesturing wildly, probably ordering the Wagyu beef rare just to prove he was a man of taste. My phone buzzed against the center console. The screen lit up, casting a blue glow over my hands. It was not a text message. It was a push notification from the Nexus Flow Sentinel app. Critical alert. Unauthorized admin access detected. Location: Otis HQ server room. User: root override attempt. I stared at the screen. They were already trying to get in. Bianca or Preston, probably. Preston was back at the office or had logged into the on-site terminal trying to access the executive dashboard. They wanted to see the numbers. They wanted to see the money rolling in. But they did not have the encryption keys. They were banging on a steel door with a plastic spoon. For a split second, instinct took over. My thumb hovered over the deny access button. I could lock them out completely right now. I could send a security protocol that would brick the terminal and save the system from their clumsy interference. I could save them from their own stupidity. I looked back at the restaurant window. Bianca was laughing, throwing her head back, her diamond necklace catching the light. My mother was clapping. They looked so happy, so sure of their victory. If I stopped them now, they would blame me. They would say I was jealous. They would say I was sabotaging the new CEO. I lowered my hand. I did not press deny. I did not press allow. I simply swiped the notification away and put the phone face down. Let them play, I whispered to the empty car. I took another sip of water. Let them think they are in control. Let them push every button and pull every lever. Because when you play with a system, you do not understand. You do not just break the machine. You become the error. And I was the only one who knew how to debug it. The elevator ride up to the 30th floor felt like the longest commute of my life. I did not need a key to enter my apartment. My front door was already wide open, propped ajar by a stack of my own books. The hallway, usually a pristine corridor of silent wealth, looked like a yard sale gone wrong. My clothes were in garbage bags. My lamps were on their sides. My life, or at least the version of it I had built within these walls, was scattered across the carpet for the neighbors to see. Preston was standing in the middle of the foyer, holding a latte, barking orders at two sweaty movers who looked apologetic but kept working. He was enjoying this. This was not just eviction, it was an exorcism. He wanted every trace of me gone so he could repaint the walls with his ego. He saw me and grinned a cruel expression that did not reach his eyes. About time, he sneered. I told them to start early. Bianca wants to do a walkthrough at 5 and this place smells like ozone and loneliness. I did not respond. I walked past him, stepping over my framed diplomas that had been tossed on the floor like placemats. I did not care about the furniture. I did not care about the view I was losing. I was scanning the room for one specific thing. Hey, careful with the floors! Preston yelled at a mover who was dragging a heavy metal tower. Then he looked at me and laughed. He walked over to my custom-built server tower, the one I had hand-soldered myself, the machine that had processed the logistics data for the entire eastern seaboard. He kicked it. The metal casing rattled against the hardwood. Hurry it up, he yelled. Get this electronic junk out of here. It is scratching the floor. We need this place cleared out. It is just scrap metal anyway. I stopped walking. I looked at the spot where his shoe had made contact with the machine. Then I looked at the floor near the base of the tower. There it was. Sliding out from under a tangle of Ethernet cables was a small, matte black object. To Preston, it looked like a paperweight. To the uneducated eye, it was just a portable hard drive. I knelt down and picked it up. It was cool to the touch. Etched on the side in faint gray letters were the words, Nexus Key. This drive contained the encryption handshake for the entire Otis logistics fleet. It held the route access protocols, the GPS calibration data, and the proprietary source code. Without this drive, the mainframe was just a brain without oxygen. Preston had just kicked the heart of the company, and he did not even know it. You missed a spot, Preston mocked, gesturing to a pile of reference books in the corner. Are you going to cry, Jada? Do you want a moment to say goodbye to your little nerd cave? I dusted off a speck of lint from the drive and slid it into the front pocket of my hoodie. It felt heavy, not with weight but with consequence. I zipped the pocket shut. I will let the trash collectors handle the rest, I said softly. I turned around and walked back to the elevator. Preston laughed behind me, a loud, triumphant sound. He thought he had won. He thought he was clearing out the trash. He had no idea that I had just walked out with the only thing that mattered. As the elevator doors closed, cutting off his laughter, I touched the drive in my pocket. The countdown had officially begun. I drove my rusted Honda Civic out of the apartment complex, the one I had just been evicted from. My family thought this car was a symbol of my failure. They thought I drove it because I could not afford anything better. They did not know it was camouflage. In a city obsessed with status, a dented sedan was an invisibility cloak. I merged onto the highway, heading straight for the heart of downtown Atlanta. The skyline glittered ahead of me, dominated by the sleek silver needle of the Nexus Tower. Most people knew the Nexus Tower as the hub of the city's tech boom. My family just knew it as a building they could not afford to lease office space in. I pulled into the underground parking garage, bypassing the visitor lot and heading straight for the restricted executive level. I parked my Honda next to a lineup of Maseratis and Porsches belonging to my VP of Engineering and my Chief Financial Officer. It looked ridiculous sitting there like a stray dog at a pedigree show. I got out and walked to the private elevator bank. A security guard named Marcus, a man built like a linebacker, stepped forward. He did not look at my hoodie or my jeans. He looked at my face. Good morning, Miss Otis, he said, opening the door for me. We have the boardroom prepped for the strategy meeting. Thank you, Marcus, I said, swiping a plain black keycard against the reader. The light turned green instantly. The elevator shot up 70 floors in seconds. When the doors opened, the hum of the server room greeted me. It was a low, steady vibration that felt like music. I walked out onto the floor of Nexus Flow, the software company I had built from scratch 5 years ago. My family thought I fixed printers. They did not know I was the anonymous founder of a platform valued at $500 million. They did not know that Nexus Flow was the central nervous system for 40% of the logistics industry in North America. My chief operations officer, Leo, was waiting for me. He looked frantic. He was holding a tablet with a graph plummeting downward in red ink. "Jada," he said, skipping the pleasantries. "We just got the notification. The admin account for Otis Logistics just initiated a hard disconnect. They canceled the enterprise maintenance package effective immediately." I walked past him into my corner office, throwing my bag onto the white leather sofa. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window looking down at the city. From this height, the cars looked like toys. "They think they are saving money." Leo continued, pacing behind me. "They revoked the remote access keys. Jada, without those keys, the system cannot perform the hourly handshake with the server. If they do not reconnect within 48 hours, the license validation will fail. Their entire fleet will lock up." He paused, waiting for me to panic. He knew Otis Logistics was my family's legacy. He expected me to intervene, to send a manual override to save them from their own ignorance. "Should I call them?" Leo asked. "Should I warn them that they are about to brick 500 trucks?" I turned around and looked at the digital map on the wall. A single red dot blinked among a sea of green. It was Otis Logistics slowly going dark. "No," I said, my voice steady. "Do not call them. Do not send a warning. They wanted to cut the cord. Let them see what happens when the power goes out." "But the drivers," Leo stammered. "We will hire the drivers when the company folds," I said. "But for now, we wait." It took exactly 48 hours for Bianca to begin the demolition of a 50-year legacy. She did not call it destruction. She called it rebranding. I sat in my office at Nexus Tower watching the live feed from the depot security cameras, which I still had access to. The first thing to go was the signature midnight blue paint of the Otis fleet. In its place, Bianca authorized a $2 million expenditure to wrap every single heavy-duty truck in a shimmering metallic shade she called rose gold. They looked less like industrial machines capable of hauling 40 tons of freight and more like oversized accessories for a Barbie dream house. But the paint was just cosmetic. The real damage was structural. On Tuesday morning, Bianca summoned the engineering department. These were men and women who had kept the fleet running for decades. They understood the difference between a transmission fluid leak and a software glitch. She fired them all. Every single one. She told them they did not fit the new vibe. By lunchtime, she had replaced 15 certified systems engineers with a team of 22-year-old social media managers whose only qualification was having over 10,000 followers on TikTok. The head of facilities, a man named Arthur, who had worked for my grandfather since the 80s, tried to intervene. He stood in the middle of the open plan office holding a clipboard, his hands shaking with suppressed rage. "Ms. Otis," he said, his voice tight, "we cannot fire the cooling technicians. The server room in the basement generates a massive amount of heat. It needs to be kept at 65 degrees constantly, or the hardware will melt." Bianca looked up from her phone, annoyed that someone was interrupting her selfie session. She waved a hand dismissively. "Arthur, you are living in the past. We are going green. Do you know how much that air conditioning bill is every month? It is astronomical. We are cutting overhead. Turn the AC off. Open a window if it gets hot. The computers will be fine." Arthur stared at her. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He knew he was talking to a wall, a very expensive, very stupid wall. "I am serious, Arthur," Bianca continued, snapping her gum. "Turn it off. We need that budget for the launch party. I want an ice sculpture of my face, and those are not cheap." Arthur was escorted out by security 5 minutes later. Bianca posted a story on Instagram captioned, "Cleaning house. Out with the dusty old energy. In with the fresh." She had no idea that by turning off the cooling system, she was not just saving money on electricity. She was literally cooking the brain of the company. From my office miles away, I saw the internal temperature sensors on my dashboard begin to climb. 70 degrees, 75, 80. The heat was rising, and Bianca was too busy picking out filters to notice that she had just lit the fuse. Wednesday morning brought the first tremor. I was sitting in my command center at Nexus Tower sipping green tea watching the wall of monitors. To the naked eye, the Otis logistics fleet looked healthy. 500 green dots moving across the map of North America. But I was not looking at the map. I was looking at the code stream running beneath it. At 10 o'clock, exactly 3 dots turned yellow. Then 5. Then 10. It was a latency error. A packet loss. The trucks were trying to ping the main server for a routine license verification handshake, and the server was not waving back. Because the server was in a landfill somewhere, and the new administration had cut the fiber optic cord. I tapped into the audio feed from the dispatch center. I still had backdoor access to the comm system. A driver named Miller, a veteran who had driven for my grandfather for 20 years, was the first to call in. Dispatch, this is Unit 402. My dashboard is acting funny. I am getting a connection unstable warning. The throttle feels lagging. Should I pull over? The call was routed to the chief operating officer's cell phone because Bianca had fired the dispatch manager the day before to save money. Preston answered on the third ring. I could hear the wind in the background. I could hear the chirp of birds. He was not in the war room. He was on the fairway at the Buckhead Country Club. What is it now? Preston snapped his voice tight with irritation. I am in the middle of a backswing. Sir, the computer is lagging. Miller sounded worried. It says check server connection. The GPS is flickering. It is just a little lag, Miller. Stop being a baby. Preston scoffed. The cell service is probably bad in that area. Just keep driving. The wheels turn whether the screen is on or off right. Do not call me again unless the truck explodes. I am putting for birdie. Preston hung up. I watched on the satellite feed as he high-fived his caddy and lined up his shot. He had no idea what he had just ignored. That lag was not bad cell service. It was the digital equivalent of a heart skipping a beat. The trucks were programmed to check for a valid software license every hour. If the check failed 3 times in a row, the system would assume the vehicle had been stolen or hacked. First failure. Warning light. Second failure. Throttle lag. Third failure. Lockdown. Preston had just told them to ignore the first symptom of a fatal heart attack. I watched the yellow dots flicker on my screen. They were still moving, but for how long? The system was designed to be patient, but it was not designed to be ignored. I saw the countdown timer in the code initiate. 24 hours until total system lockout. Preston sank his putt and pumped his fist in the air. He thought he was winning the game. He did not know the game board was about to disappear beneath his feet. Thursday night, the eve of the great launch. I sat alone in the executive suite of Nexus Tower. The lights dimmed the city of Atlanta, glowing beneath me like a circuit board. On the 80-inch monitor on my wall, the local news channel was broadcasting a special segment titled The New Era of Otis Logistics. My parents, Desmond and Patricia, sat on a plush beige sofa across from a smiling host. They looked immaculate. My father wore a navy suit that cost more than my first car. My mother was dripping in pearls, her hair coiffed into a helmet of perfection. They looked like the picture of success. They looked like people who did not owe millions of dollars in debt. The host, a woman with blindingly white teeth, leaned forward. Desmond, Patricia, this is a massive transition. Handing over the reins of a 50-year-old empire to your youngest daughter, Bianca. Tell us what made you decide she was the one. My father beamed. He looked directly into the camera, his eyes twinkling with practiced charm. It was an easy choice, really. Bianca has the spark. She has the vision. You see, logistics is not just about trucks and roads. It is about connection. It is about leadership. Bianca understands people. She has that executive presence that you cannot teach. She is a natural-born leader, just like her grandfather. I took a sip of sparkling water, the bubbles biting my tongue. Just like her grandfather. The lie was so big it almost had its own gravitational pull. My grandfather despised vanity. He would have hated the rose gold trucks. He would have hated the firing of his loyal staff. The host nodded enthusiastically. And you have another daughter, correct? Jada, is she involved in the transition? My mother let out a small, polite laugh, the kind that sounds like glass breaking. Oh, Jada. Well, we love all our children, of course. But Jada is different. She is more of a background player. She never really had the head for business. She is very content with her small life. She lacks the ambition to carry the family torch. We offered her a place, but frankly, she is just not cut out for the high-stakes world of corporate leadership. She is a worker bee, not a queen. I paused the video. I stared at my mother's frozen face on the screen. A worker bee, a background player, a failure. They were saying this to thousands of people. They were cementing my reputation as the disappointment of the family. I turned my chair toward my desk. 3 monitors hummed with life. On the center screen, a countdown timer was running silently. It was the license verification protocol. It was set to expire in 12 hours, right in the middle of Bianca's grand speech. My mother was right about one thing. I was a worker bee, and worker bees protect the hive. But when the hive becomes toxic, the worker bee can also sting, and my sting was fatal. I placed my fingers on the mechanical keyboard. The clicking sound was sharp and rhythmic in the silent office. I did not feel sad. I did not feel angry. I felt precise. I typed a single line of code into the command terminal. Prep system lockdown. Execute at 0900 hours. The screen flashed a confirmation. Ready. I looked back at the frozen image of my parents on the TV. Enjoy your interview, I whispered, because tomorrow, the only thing on TV will be your ruin. The basement of the Otis family mansion was built to survive a nuclear winter. It was reinforced with concrete and steel designed by my grandfather to house the most critical infrastructure of his empire. But to Preston, my brother-in-law, it was just wasted square footage. He walked down the stairs holding his phone in one hand and a sleek aluminum baseball bat in the other. He was wearing a headband and designer workout gear that had never seen a drop of sweat. He was not there to inspect the foundation. He was there to clear the room for Bianca's new meditation and hot yoga studio. The server rack stood in the corner. It was a monolith of black steel and blinking blue lights. It hummed with a low, steady vibration. This machine was the physical bridge between the trucks on the road and the cloud network I controlled. Even though I had removed the encryption key, the hardware was still processing raw telemetry data. It was worth $500,000. To Preston, it was just a loud, ugly box that Jada the nerd had left behind. Preston held up his phone and hit the Go Live button on Instagram. He flashed a winning smile at the camera, checking his hair in the reflection. Hey everyone, it is Preston here, the COO of Otis Logistics, coming at you live. I am down in the dungeon today doing a little spring cleaning. You won't believe the junk my wife's sister left behind. Look at this thing. He flipped the camera to show the server rack. The blue lights danced in the darkness. This is what happens when you let a hoarder live in your house, Preston said, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. This dusty old computer is making so much noise. It is vibrating the floorboards upstairs. Bianca cannot center her chakras with this thing buzzing like a giant refrigerator. So today we are going to do a little demolition therapy. We are going to smash the past to make room for the future. He handed the phone to a hired contractor who was standing by the door, instructing him to keep the frame steady. Preston stepped up to the server rack. He gripped the baseball bat with both hands. He did not look like an executive. He looked like a vandal in expensive sneakers. "This is for the yoga room," he yelled. He swung the bat. The sound of aluminum hitting the server chassis was sickening. It sounded like a car crash in a library. The metal casing buckled. The glass door of the rack shattered, spraying fragments across the floor. Preston laughed. It was a manic, adrenaline-fueled laugh. He swung again. And again. "Take that, you piece of junk," he screamed. Sparks showered down as the bat connected with the internal power supply. The blue lights flickered and died. The humming sound, the heartbeat of the building was silenced. It was replaced by the heavy breathing of a man who had never done a day of real work in his life. Preston grabbed the phone back from the contractor. He pointed the camera at the twisted pile of metal and silicon. "And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you handle business. The space is cleared. Namaste." He ended the stream. He looked at the wreckage and wiped a non-existent bead of sweat from his forehead. He thought he had just destroyed a useless computer. He did not realize he had just physically severed the hardline connection required for the manual override. He had just locked the door and swallowed the key. The silence of my executive suite was shattered. It was not a phone ring or a knock at the door. It was a sound I had programmed myself, a sound I hoped I would never have to hear. A low-frequency, bone-rattling klaxon that vibrated through the floorboards. Instantly, the ambient lighting in my office shifted from a soft white to a pulsing emergency red. My 3 monitors, usually a soothing cascade of green data streams, synchronized into a single terrifying image. In the center of the 80-inch main screen, bold white letters flashed like a warning beacon. Critical hardware failure. Physical breach detected. Location: Otis Residence sub-basement. I stood up slowly, my heart rate surprisingly steady. This was not a software bug. This was not a connection timeout. This was violence. The system had detected a catastrophic destruction of the on-site hardware. I typed a quick command to access the black box log. The server rack in my parents' basement was equipped with an internal backup camera and a cellular uplink designed to upload the last 10 minutes of footage to the cloud in case of fire flood or theft. I clicked the file labeled Last Transmission. The video opened in high definition. I watched as Preston walked into the frame. I saw the aluminum baseball bat in his hand. I saw the manic grin on his face as he postured for his Instagram live stream. I turned up the volume. I heard him call my life's work a piece of junk. I heard him say he was clearing space for a yoga room. And then I watched him swing. The sound of the metal bat crushing the server chassis played through my office speakers. It was the sound of a skull cracking. I watched as the blue status lights flickered and died. I watched as sparks showered the concrete floor. I saw Preston laugh a triumphant, ignorant laugh as he stood over the wreckage of the machine that was the only thing keeping his wife's company alive. He did not know what he had done. By destroying the physical hardware, he had not just broken a computer. He had triggered the tamper protection clause in the Nexus Flow operating system. The software interpreted this not as an accident, but as a hostile attack. The safety protocols were now gone. There was no grace period. There was no rolling back. I froze the video frame on Preston's smiling face. The cold detachment I had maintained for the last 3 days evaporated. In its place was something hotter, something sharper. It was not sadness. It was the icy clarity of an executioner. They had crossed the line. They had not just evicted me. They had violently destroyed my property. They had declared war. I looked at the red light pulsing on my desk. I looked at the frozen image of Preston. "Okay," I said, my voice barely a whisper in the red room. "You want to treat this like a game. You want to play house." I reached out and placed my finger on the enter key. "Then I will turn off the power." I pressed the key. The command sent a signal to the cloud, locking the encryption certificates for all 500 trucks instantly. The trap was sprung. The Friday morning sun hit the asphalt of the main distribution hub with blinding intensity. It was the perfect lighting for a disaster. Bianca had transformed the industrial trucking yard into something that looked more like the set of a music video. 500 Peterbilt trucks stood in perfect formation, row after row of shimmering metal. The rose-gold vinyl wraps caught the sunlight, turning the fleet into a blinding sea of pink metallic glitter. It was grotesque. It was expensive, and it was exactly what Bianca thought leadership looked like. A red carpet ran down the center of the lane. A VIP tent was set up on the loading dock, stocked with crystal flutes and towers of imported macaroons. The mayor of Atlanta was there, sweating in his suit, shaking hands with my father. Executives from Amazon and Walmart stood in a tight circle checking their phones, calculating the shipping routes for the millions of dollars of inventory sitting in those trailers. They were promised a revolution. They were about to get a blackout. Then the music started. A heavy bass beat thumped from concert-grade speakers. Bianca stepped onto the raised platform. She was not wearing a business suit. She was not wearing safety gear. She was wearing a floor-length sequined evening gown that cost more than the annual salary of the driver standing closest to her. She held a diamond-encrusted microphone in one hand and a black and white checkered flag in the other. She looked out at the crowd, her face projected onto two massive LED screens flanking the stage. "Welcome everyone to the new age of logistics," she purred into the mic. Her voice echoed across the yard. "For too long this industry has been dirty. It has been boring. My grandfather built the foundation, but I am here to build the castle. Look at these machines. They are not just trucks. They are moving sculptures of success. We are not just delivering packages anymore. We are delivering an experience." The crowd applauded politely. My parents beamed from the front row, looking at their daughter as if she were a queen. Preston stood off to the side, giving a thumbs up, looking proud of the chaos he helped create. Bianca raised the flag high above her head. The dramatic music swelled to a crescendo. She took a deep breath, ready for the photo opportunity that would define her career. "Drivers," she shouted, her voice cracking with excitement. "Prepare to make history. Ladies and gentlemen, start your engines." The flag snapped downward with a sharp, confident motion. Bianca froze in her dramatic pose, her smile wide and plastic, waiting for the earth-shaking roar of 500 diesel engines to validate her existence. She held that pose for 1 second, then 2, then 5. But there was no roar. There was no rumble. There was no vibration in the ground. The only sound that followed her command was the distant cawing of a crow and the feedback whine of her own microphone. 500 Peterbilt trucks representing millions of dollars of horsepower sat motionless in the sun. They were 500 rose gold statues. Bianca's smile began to tremble at the corners. She kept her arm raised as if the air itself was thick enough to hold it up. She looked at the front row of trucks. The drivers were staring back at her through the windshields. They were not revving the engines. They were looking down at their dashboards with expressions of confusion and panic. "Start your engines," Bianca repeated, her voice faltering slightly. She tapped the microphone, a thumping sound that echoed awkwardly across the silent yard. "Hello," I said, "start the engines. Let us go, people. We are live." A driver in the front row, a burly man named Miller, who had driven for the company for 20 years, rolled down his window. The sound of the electric window motor was comically loud in the dead silence. He leaned his head out, his face pale. "Ms. Otis," he shouted, "it is not doing anything. The key is turning, but the starter won't engage." Bianca lowered the flag slowly. "What do you mean it won't engage? Just push the button. It is a brand new truck." "I am pushing the button," Miller yelled back, frustration rising in his voice. "Look at the dash. It is all red." Suddenly, other windows rolled down. The silence broke, replaced by a chorus of confused shouting from the drivers. "Hey lady, mine is dead too. My screen is locked out. It says license expired." "What does that mean? I cannot even release the parking brake. The computer is fried." The murmurs began to ripple through the VIP tent. The mayor of Atlanta checked his watch and whispered something to his aide. The executives from Amazon exchanged worried glances. This was not the revolution they were promised. This was a malfunction. Bianca's face turned a shade of red that clashed horribly with her dress. She laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound that made everyone uncomfortable. "Okay, very funny guys," she stammered into the mic. "A little prank on the new boss. I get it. Haha. Good one. Now seriously, cut it out. We have schedules to keep. Start the trucks." She pointed at Miller again. "Drive. That is an order." Miller held up his hands in surrender. "I cannot make it drive if the computer says no, Ms. Otis. The whole system is bricked. It is asking for an administrator password. Bianca looked at her parents in the front row. My father Desmond stood up, his face purple with rage. He gestured wildly at the trucks. "Kick it or something," he yelled at the drivers. "Make it work. We are losing money every second you sit there." But kicking it would not help. The silence remained absolute. The fleet was paralyzed. And slowly the realization began to dawn on Bianca that this was not a prank. The Empire had just stalled. Miller sat in the driver's seat of the lead truck. The smell of new leather and expensive air freshener was suffocating. He stared at the digital dashboard. It was no longer a navigation map or a speedometer. It was a death sentence painted in pixels. The entire 7-inch LCD screen was washing the cabin in a harsh, pulsing crimson light. Bright red letters scrolled across the display. License expired. Hardware ID invalid. Contact Nexus Flow Administrator. Beneath that, a smaller message blinked relentlessly. System lockdown engaged. Miller grabbed the steering wheel with both hands and tried to turn it. It was locked rigid as if it had been welded to the steering column. He reached for the yellow diamond-shaped parking brake valve and pushed it in to release the air brakes. It popped right back out with a sharp hiss of rejection. The electronic control unit had engaged the safety interlocks. The truck believed it was being stolen, and it had done exactly what I programmed it to do. It had turned itself into a 10-ton paperweight. He tried the ignition again. Nothing, not even a click, just the silence of a dead machine. "I cannot move it," Miller yelled out the window, his voice cracking. "The brakes are seized. The wheel is locked. It is the computer, Ms. Otis. It is completely dead." On the ground, the panic began to ripple outward from the trucks to the VIP tent. The silence was replaced by a low buzzing murmur that grew louder by the second. The regional director for Amazon, a man in a sharp gray suit who had flown in specifically for this launch, tapped his phone screen furiously. He was not taking photos of the rose gold trucks anymore. He was checking his logistics dashboard. He was calculating the cost of delay, $50,000 a minute. He turned to the Walmart executive standing next to him. "They are not moving," he whispered, but in the quiet yard it sounded like a shout. "Why are they not moving? My inventory is sitting in those trailers." My father Desmond rushed over to the side of the stage. He looked at the trucks, then at the investors, sweat pouring down his face. He grabbed Preston by the lapel of his blazer. "Fix it," he hissed. "Go down there and hotwire it if you have to. Do something. We look like idiots." Preston scrambled down the stairs and ran toward Miller's truck. He jumped onto the running board and looked inside. When he saw the red screen, his face went pale. He saw the words, Nexus Flow. He saw the name of the company he had mocked. He saw the ghost of the sister he had evicted. "This does not make sense," Preston muttered, banging his fist on the door. "We own the trucks. Why does it say license expired?" He looked around at the other drivers. 500 screens, 500 red lights, 500 dead machines. The realization hit him like a physical blow. They owned the steel, but they did not own the mind. And the mind had just decided to quit. The paralysis in the trucking yard was bad. But what happened next was a catastrophe that would make the evening news. The infection I had planted was not limited to the vehicles. It was systemic. It lived in the walls, it lived in the wiring. And at exactly 10 o'clock it decided to close the shop. A deafening mechanical grinding noise erupted from the main warehouse behind the stage. It sounded like the earth was splitting open. Everyone turned to look. The massive steel bay doors, the ones that allowed the forklifts to load cargo, began to descend. They did not move slowly. They slammed down with the force of a guillotine. Boom, boom, boom. One by one, the 20 loading docks were sealed shut. The automated locking mechanisms engaged with a heavy metallic clank that echoed across the terrified silence of the yard. The warehouse had just turned itself into a fortress. No one could get in. And more importantly, nothing could get out. Inside that fortress was the crown jewel of the Otis operation, the cold storage facility. I watched the telemetry data on my screen. The warehouse management system sent a command to the industrial cooling units. Shut down. Immediately, the low hum of the refrigeration compressors died. The giant fans that kept the air at a crisp sub-zero temperature spun to a halt. Silence fell over the millions of dollars of inventory stacked on the shelves. This was not dry goods. This was high-stakes perishable cargo for VIP clients. 2 tons of live Maine lobsters destined for 5-star restaurants. Pallet after pallet of A5 Wagyu beef imported from Japan. Thousands of vials of temperature-sensitive pharmaceuticals. The digital thermometers on the wall began to tick upward. -10. -5. 0. The ice began to sweat. The clock had started on the most expensive spoilage event in the company's history. In 2 hours, that warehouse would not smell like money. It would smell like rotting fish and failure. Preston was pacing in circles on the asphalt, his phone pressed so hard against his ear, it looked like he was trying to push it through his skull. He was screaming at the head mechanic. "What do you mean you cannot open the doors?" Preston shrieked. "Use a crowbar. Use a blowtorch. I do not care. Break them down." I could not hear the mechanic's side of the conversation, but I could imagine it. "You cannot crowbar a magnetic lock rated for 10 tons of force. It is getting hot in there," Preston yelled, spit flying from his mouth. "The lobster is going to die. Do you know how much a dead lobster is worth?" 0. It is worth 0. Turn the fans back on. He listened for a moment, then threw his phone onto the pavement. It shattered. He grabbed his hair with both hands, looking wildly around the yard. "It is the software," he screamed at no one in particular. "It is the damn software. It locked us out. It is killing the beef." He ran over to the nearest control panel mounted on the wall and started mashing buttons with his fist. But the screen was dark. The keypad was dead. He was trying to fight a ghost with his bare hands. And the ghost was winning. The temperature inside the warehouse ticked up another degree. The melt had begun. My father Desmond was a man who prided himself on control. He controlled the board, he controlled the family, and he controlled the narrative. But standing in the middle of a silent trucking yard with the smell of panic rising like heat from the pavement, he finally realized he had lost the steering wheel. He watched the Amazon executives scream into a phone. He watched the warehouse doors lock tight. He looked at the red screens flashing on the dashboards, and for the first time in his life, he did the math correctly. This was not a mechanical failure. This was an eviction. And he knew exactly who the landlord was. He pulled his phone from the inside pocket of his sweaty suit jacket. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped the device. He did not dial the police. He did not dial the insurance company. He dialed me. I sat in my office miles away and watched my phone vibrate on the glass desk. The caller ID flashed a single word. Father. It was a word that used to make me jump to attention. It used to make me eager to please. Now it just looked like a notification from a stranger. I did not pick up. I took a sip of my tea and let it ring. 1, 2, 3, 4. The call went to voicemail. But he did not hear my voice. He did not hear the apologetic daughter asking him to leave a message. I had updated my routing protocols that morning. Instead, a cool, synthetic female voice answered. "Thank you for calling Nexus Flow Enterprise Support. We are currently experiencing high call volumes. To open a priority ticket, please have your 6-digit client ID ready. Please note that emergency technical support is billed at a rate of $5,000 per hour. Please enter a valid credit card number to proceed." My father pulled the phone away from his ear and stared at it as if it had just bitten him. The color drained from his face. He had expected a plea for forgiveness. He got a billing department. Bianca saw who he was calling. She grabbed his arm, her long nails digging into his expensive suit fabric. Her face was twisted with confusion and rage. "Daddy, why are you calling Jada?" she shrieked. "Put the phone away. This is a crisis. We need real experts. We need a hacking team or the FBI. Why are you wasting time calling her? She is just a computer fixer. She is a loser who lives in a dark apartment. She cannot help us." My father looked at Bianca. For the first time, he did not see a golden child. He saw a liability in a sequined dress. He shook her hand off his arm. "Shut up, Bianca," he snapped. "Just shut up. She is not just a fixer. She built the machine, and we just locked ourselves out of it." He dialed again, and again, but the result was always the same. Enter credit card, enter client ID. The walls were closing in, and the only person with the key was the daughter he had thrown away. Amidst the screaming drivers and the cacophony of ringing alarms, a sleek, black sedan rolled onto the chaotic scene. It moved slowly like a hearse arriving at a funeral. The back door opened and Lawyer Henderson stepped out. He was the only person in the entire zip code who looked calm. He adjusted his suit jacket, checked his watch, and walked up the steps of the stage, bypassing the panicked investors and the sweating politicians. He looked like a man who had read the instruction manual while everyone else was trying to smash the machine with a hammer. He walked straight to Bianca. She was pacing back and forth, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face, screaming at a terrified assistant to call the FBI. When she saw Henderson, she lunged at him. "Mr. Henderson," she shrieked. "You have to do something. Someone hacked us. It is cyber terrorism. I want them arrested. I want them in jail." Henderson did not look rattled. He did not offer comfort. He simply reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick document. It was the last will and testament of Otis Otis. He dropped it onto the table next to the melting ice sculpture. It landed with a heavy, authoritative thud. "Ms. Otis," Henderson said, his voice cutting through her hysteria. "There is no hacker, there is no terrorism. This is simply a matter of contract law." Bianca stared at the document. "What are you talking about?" Henderson opened the file to page 42. He pointed a manicured finger at a paragraph highlighted in yellow. "You were so excited about the houses and the cars during the reading that you stopped listening," he said. "You did not let me finish the section regarding intellectual property. Your grandfather was a wise man, Bianca. He knew that steel rusts, but code is eternal." He looked at my father, who was standing frozen nearby. "Mr. Otis left the physical assets to you," Bianca Henderson explained. "The trucks, the tires, the warehouse walls. That is the hardware. That is the body. But he separated the company's operating system into a distinct legal entity 5 years ago. He wanted to ensure that the brain of the company was protected from mismanagement." My father's face went gray. "Nexus Flow," he whispered. "Correct," Henderson said. "Nexus Flow owns the software. They own the GPS algorithms, the engine management protocols, and the temperature control systems. That is the soul of the machine. And the soul belongs to Jada." Bianca looked at the trucks, then back at the lawyer. But I own the trucks. They are mine." "Yes, you own 500 beautiful rose gold lamps," Henderson said, his tone dry. "But your sister owns the electricity. And since you decided to evict her and destroy her server, she has decided to flip the switch." He closed the folder. "Without Jada's code, those trucks are just expensive sculptures. They are 500 piles of scrap metal. And right now, the only person who can turn them back into vehicles is the woman you called a failure on national television. I suggest you find her. And I suggest you bring a very large checkbook, because in the software business, the user agreement is non-negotiable." Bianca snatched her phone back from the table. Her acrylic nails clicked frantically against the glass screen. For the first time in her life, she was not opening Instagram or TikTok. She was opening Google. She typed the name Henderson had thrown at her like a grenade. Nexus Flow. She typed it with aggressive, angry keystrokes, expecting to find a broken website or a cheap landing page for a freelance computer repair service. She expected to find proof that this was a joke. She hit enter. The page loaded instantly on the 5G network. She did not find a small business. She found a monolith. The top result was not a website. It was a stock market ticker. NXF. The graph was a steep, jagged line climbing upward in green ink. Valuation estimate, $500 million. Below that, the search results filled the screen with headlines from Wall Street Journal, TechCrunch, and Bloomberg. Nexus Flow revolutionizes supply chain. The invisible giant of logistics. Bianca felt the blood drain from her face. She clicked on the Images tab. She needed to see it. She needed to see who was running this empire. The first image was a cover from Forbes magazine dated 6 months ago. Bianca had never seen it because she only read fashion blogs. But there it was. A high-definition studio portrait of a woman standing in front of a wall of server banks. The woman was wearing a tailored white suit. Her arms crossed, her expression sharp and commanding. It was a look of absolute power. It was Jada. Bianca dropped the phone. It clattered onto the plastic table, but the screen stayed lit, staring up at them. My father leaned over, squinting at the display. He saw the headline under the photo. The Silent Architect. Meet Jada Otis, the reclusive genius controlling 40% of North American freight. My mother put a hand to her mouth, letting out a small, strangled gasp. "That is not Jada," she whispered. "That cannot be Jada. Jada wears hoodies. Jada fixes the Wi-Fi. Jada lives in that dark apartment." Preston picked up the phone. He scrolled down to the corporate bio. He read it aloud, his voice trembling. Founder and CEO, Jada Otis. Founded in 2019. Nexus Flow provides the proprietary operating system for 80% of modern autonomous fleets. He looked up at the silent rose gold trucks. He looked at the smashed server in the video he had posted. He looked at his wife. "We did not just fire the IT girl," Preston said, his voice sounding hollow. "We declared war on a tech titan. We are renting the trucks from the bank, but we were renting the brain from her. And we did not even know it." Bianca stared at the photo of her sister. In the picture, Jada looked nothing like the girl they had mocked in the lawyer's office. She looked dangerous. She looked like a predator who had been patiently waiting for the prey to walk into the trap. "But I am the CEO." Bianca stammered, tears streaming down her face again. "Grandpa said I am the CEO." Henderson picked up his briefcase. He looked at the family with a mix of pity and professional detachment. "You are the CEO of a parking lot," Ms. Otis Henderson said. "Jada is the CEO of the world that allows you to move, and right now she has decided that you are not going anywhere." The realization hit them all at once. The weight of it was heavier than the trucks. They had been arrogant. They had been cruel. And in their ignorance, they had handed the gun to the only person who had a reason to pull the trigger. They stood in the silence of their dead empire, staring at a small phone screen that proved they were not the kings and queens they thought they were. They were just tenants. And the landlord had just changed the locks. The elevator ride to the 72nd floor was the longest silence my family had ever endured. They stood in the stainless steel box, huddled together like refugees. My father's suit was stained with sweat. My mother's perfect hair was fraying at the edges. Bianca was still wearing her sequined evening gown, but under the harsh fluorescent lights of the Nexus Tower, she did not look like a queen. She looked like a prom queen who had been left out in the rain. When the doors slid open, they did not step into a dusty basement or a cluttered IT closet. They stepped into the future. The lobby of Nexus Flow was a cathedral of glass and white marble. The air was cool and smelled of ozone and expensive espresso. Beyond the security turnstiles, the main operations floor stretched out like a city. 300 employees sat at ergonomic workstations, their faces illuminated by the glow of curved monitors. There was no shouting. There was no chaos. There was only the low, steady hum of billion-dollar productivity. My father stopped walking. He looked around, his mouth slightly open. He saw engineers analyzing traffic patterns in Tokyo. He saw data scientists optimizing shipping routes for Hamburg. He saw the logo of his own company, Otis Logistics, displayed on a massive wall screen as a tiny, insignificant red dot labeled offline. "This is all yours," he whispered. He sounded terrified. A young assistant with a headset walked up to them. She did not curtsy. She did not offer them coffee. She held a clipboard. Ms. Otis is expecting you in conference room Alpha, she said. Follow me. Please do not touch anything. She led them through the maze of desks. My family walked with their heads down. Every employee they passed looked at them, then looked back at their screens. They were not impressed by the sequins or the Gucci belts. In this building, status was determined by code, not clothes, and my family was wearing the wrong uniform. They reached the conference room at the end of the hall. It was a glass box suspended over the city, offering a panoramic view of the skyline. I was already sitting at the head of the long table. I was wearing a white tailored suit that cost more than Preston's car. My laptop was open. My hands were folded on the desk. I did not stand up when they entered. I did not smile. Jada, my mother gasped, rushing forward with her arms open. Oh, thank God. This is all a terrible misunderstanding. We were so worried about you. I raised one hand. It was a small gesture, but it stopped her cold. She froze, her arms still half raised, looking at me like I had just slapped her. Sit down, I said. My voice was calm, devoid of any warmth. They pulled out the heavy Eames chairs and sat. They looked small on the other side of the table. Bianca was sniffling, clutching her purse. Preston was staring at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. I tapped a key on my laptop. A timer appeared on the screen facing them. Welcome to Nexus Flow, I said. I understand you are experiencing a catastrophic service interruption with your fleet. As you are no longer under a maintenance contract, this meeting is classified as emergency external consultation. I looked at my father. My rate for emergency consultation is $5,000 per hour. The clock starts now. Do you want to pay with a corporate card or personal? My father choked. 5,000. Jada. We are family. I looked at him. The man who had let his wife call me a failure on TV. Family gets a discount, I said. Strangers pay full price. And based on the eviction notice you served me yesterday, I think we are strangers. Credit or debit? Desmond. I swiped 3 fingers across my trackpad and the lights in the conference room dimmed automatically. A massive projection screen descended from the ceiling, blocking the view of the skyline. My family jumped slightly at the sudden movement. They were on edge, they were terrified, and I was about to give them the bill. Let us review the situation, I said calmly. My voice was amplified slightly by the room's hidden speakers, making me sound everywhere at once. I tapped a key. The screen flickered to life. It was the video of Preston in the basement. The audio was crisp and clear. We all watched as he swung the baseball bat. We heard the crunch of metal. We heard him laugh and call my life's work a piece of junk. We heard him say namaste as he stood over the wreckage. Preston sank low in his chair. He looked like he wanted to dissolve into the carpet. My father closed his eyes, unable to watch the display of sheer stupidity. I paused the video on the frame where sparks were flying from the server chassis. Item number 1, I said, pointing at the screen. Malicious destruction of proprietary hardware. You assumed that server was your property because it was in your house. You were incorrect. That server was on loan from Nexus Flow. It is a Class A industrial edge computing node. By destroying it, you did not just break a computer. You violated the physical security clause of our service agreement. I hit the next slide. A number appeared in bold red font. $5 million. What Preston shouted, standing up. That is insane. That box is worth maybe $10,000. You are trying to rob us. Sit down, Preston, I said without raising my voice. The hardware cost is negligible. The $5 million is the penalty for the data breach. When you smashed that drive, you corrupted the encryption keys for the entire Eastern Seaboard network. My team has been working overtime for 12 hours to contain the fallout. That is the cost of your little yoga renovation. Preston opened his mouth to argue, but my father grabbed his arm and pulled him back down. Desmond knew enough about contracts to know they were trapped. I continued. Item number 2. The screen changed. It showed a copy of the email Bianca had sent 2 days ago. The one where she canceled the maintenance contract. Unauthorized termination of enterprise license, I read aloud. When you fired the engineering team and stopped the payments, you triggered a default on the software license. The operating system that runs your trucks is a subscription service, Bianca. You cannot watch Netflix if you stop paying the bill. I clicked again. Another number appeared. $2 million. This is the standard reactivation fee for a lapsed enterprise account, I explained. It includes the cost of reissuing the digital certificates for 500 vehicles and unlocking the warehouse doors. I looked at them. They were pale. They were sweating. They were doing the math in their heads. Total damages, I said, bringing up the final slide. $7 million. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the projector fan. $7 million. It was a fortune. Even for a company like Otis Logistics, that was a massive hit to the liquid capital, especially after Bianca had spent millions on rose gold paint and parties. My mother, Patricia, looked at me with tears in her eyes. She reached across the table, her hands trembling. Jada, please, she begged. We do not have $7 million in cash sitting around. The accounts are tied up in the transition. We have to pay vendors. We have payroll next week. If we pay this, we will be bankrupt. I leaned back in my chair. I looked at the woman who had told the world I was a failure. That sounds like a logistics problem, I said coldly. I pointed to the bottom of the screen where a bank routing number was displayed. Here are the wire transfer details. The trucks are currently locked. The warehouse is currently warming up. I checked the sensors, and the internal temperature of the cold storage is now 32 degrees. Your Wagyu beef is about to become very expensive ground meat. I checked my watch. You have exactly 1 hour to make the transfer. After that, the price goes up by 10% for every hour of delay. Bianca sobbed into her hands. Preston stared at the wall in shock. My father looked at me, and for the first time he did not see his daughter. He saw a shark. Desmond stood up slowly. He looked defeated. He looked old. Make the transfer, he whispered to Preston. But Dad, Preston stammered. Make the transfer, Desmond roared, slamming his fist on the table. Do it now before she takes everything else. I watched them scramble to open their banking apps. I watched them liquefy their assets. I watched them pay the price for their arrogance. And as the notification popped up on my screen, confirming the receipt of $7 million, I did not smile. I just took a sip of my water. Business was concluded. The sound of Desmond's fist hitting the glass conference table echoed like a gunshot. It was a violent, desperate crack that made the water in the crystal pitcher tremble. My mother jumped in her seat, clutching her pearls as if they could protect her from the sudden explosion of rage. Bianca let out a small squeak of terror, shrinking away from her own father. But I did not flinch. I did not blink. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting lightly on the cool metal of my laptop, watching the man who had raised me unravel. Desmond stood over me, his face a mask of purple fury. The veins in his neck were bulging, pulsing with the rhythm of a man who was used to getting his way. He leaned across the table, invading my personal space, his breath smelling of stale coffee and fear. Enough of this nonsense, he roared, his voice cracking with the strain. I am your father, Jada. I am the reason you exist. I put clothes on your back. I put food in your mouth. You do not get to sit there in your fancy chair and hold my company hostage. I am ordering you to unlock those trucks right now. Do you hear me? That is a direct order. The room fell into a suffocating silence. He was breathing heavily, waiting for me to cower. He was waiting for the little girl who used to apologize for taking up too much space. He was waiting for the daughter who sought his approval like a flower seeking the sun. But that daughter was gone. She had died the moment he let Preston throw my servers into the trash. I looked at him. I looked at the sweat dripping down his temple. I looked at the fear behind his eyes. And I felt absolutely nothing. I leaned forward slightly, bringing my face just inches from his. Sit down, Desmond, I said softly. He blinked, taken aback by the coldness in my voice. I said, sit down, I repeated harder this time. He slowly lowered himself back into the chair, deflated by the sheer weight of my authority. You seem to be confused about the nature of our relationship, I said, my voice steady and precise. You claim to be my father, but fathers do not evict their children with 24 hours' notice. Fathers do not let their other children destroy their life's work for an Instagram video. Fathers do not go on national television and call their daughter a failure. I tapped the table with my index finger. On Tuesday, you made a choice. You chose to treat me like a tenant you could discard. You threw my belongings into the hallway. You severed the family tie. So let us be clear. There is no family in this room. There is no father. There is no daughter. I gestured to the glass walls surrounding us. This is a boardroom, not a living room. We are two separate corporate entities. I am the CEO of Nexus Flow. You are the representative of a failing logistics company that is currently in default. In the eyes of the law and in the eyes of this contract, we are strangers. And strangers do not get favors. They get invoices. Desmond opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. You have a debt of $7 million, I said. You can pay it or you can leave. Those are your only two options. Appeals to emotion are not legal tender here. Desmond looked at my mother. She was weeping silently, looking at me with a mix of horror and regret. But she said nothing. She knew they had gone too far. I am not paying you $7 million, Desmond hissed. It is extortion. I will not do it. I nodded. I expected that. Very well, I said. I reached out and pressed a small button on the console of my desk phone. A soft chime rang out. Security, please report to conference room Alpha, Y said into the speaker. I have 4 unauthorized visitors refusing to vacate the premises. Please escort them out of the building. And Marcus, feel free to be hands-on if they resist. I released the button and looked back at my father. Marcus is the head of my security detail, I explained casually. He is a former linebacker. He does not care if you are my father. He only cares that you are trespassing. I checked my watch. You have about 90 seconds before he walks through those doors. Once you are outside, the price goes up to 10 million, and I will let the news crews downstairs know exactly why the great Otis fleet is still frozen. Desmond stared at me. He looked at the door. He looked at the terror on Bianca's face. He realized finally that he had no power here. The king was naked, and the executioner was checking her watch. Wait! He choked out, his hand shaking as he reached for his phone. Do not call them. I am opening the app. I am sending the money. Just wait. The limousine ride away from Nexus Tower was quiet for exactly 3 minutes. Then Bianca pulled out her phone. She did not learn her lesson. She did not reflect on her mistakes. She did what she always did when cornered. She weaponized her tears. She found a ring light in her purse, clipped it to the top of her phone, and hit record on TikTok. She did not wipe away the mascara streaks. She knew they made her look sympathetic. She looked into the camera with wide, trembling eyes. Hey guys, she whispered, her voice cracking perfectly. I know I was supposed to launch the new fleet today, but I have some really sad news. We were hacked. My own sister Jada, she attacked our system. She is holding our company ransom. It is just so hard when your own family turns on you because they are jealous of your success. I am trying to be strong for my employees, but she is destroying everything my grandfather built. Please pray for us. She posted the video. Within 10 minutes, it had 1 million views. The internet, always hungry for a villain, turned its eyes toward Nexus Flow. Comments flooded in. They called Jada a monster. They called her a corporate bully. The hashtag Justice for Bianca started trending on Twitter. People who knew nothing about logistics or code were suddenly experts on family dynamics, painting Bianca as the innocent princess and Jada as the evil witch in the glass tower. I sat in my office and watched the digital avalanche coming toward me. Leo, my COO, was pacing nervously. Jada, the sentiment analysis is tanking, he said, showing me a graph of red downward lines. People are canceling their contracts. The stock price took a 2% hit in the last hour. We need to issue a statement. We need to deny the allegations. I spun my chair around to face the window. I watched the traffic moving through the city traffic that was managed by my software. No denial, I said. We do not argue with children, Leo. We just turn on the lights. I opened a secure file on my desktop. It was a folder labeled Truth. Inside were two files. One was the video of Preston smashing the server with a baseball bat. The other was a PDF document containing the forensic accounting records of Otis Logistics for the last 6 months. I selected both files. I opened the company's official press release channel. I did not write a long emotional defense. I simply typed a single sentence. Regarding the allegations of hacking Nexus Flow, presents the following evidence of internal sabotage and misappropriation of funds by the current Otis Logistics Administration. I hit publish. The notification hit every news desk in America simultaneously. At first there was silence as the world downloaded the files. Then the explosion happened. The video of Preston went viral instantly. Millions of people watched him laugh as he destroyed the server. They heard him call the technology junk. They heard him say he was making room for a yoga studio. The narrative of the poor, victimized family crumbled in seconds. They were not victims. They were vandals. But the PDF was the nail in the coffin. It showed the financial records. It showed exactly why the maintenance fees for the software had not been paid. I had highlighted the transactions in bright yellow. On January 15th, a transfer of $25,000 was made from the vehicle maintenance account. The recipient was not a mechanic. It was the Hermès boutique in Paris. The description read, "Emergency safety gear." On February 2nd, another $50,000 was moved from the IT infrastructure fund to a private jet charter company for a trip to Ibiza. The internet detectives went to work. Within an hour, they found photos of Bianca carrying the Birkin bag that was bought with the money meant to keep the trucks safe. They found photos of her partying in Ibiza on the dime of the company. The headlines changed faster than the weather. The New York Post ran with the headline, "Heiress Destroys Empire for a Handbag." BuzzFeed posted an article titled, "10 times Bianca Otis proved she was the worst CEO in history." The comments on Bianca's tearful video turned vicious. People realized they had been played. They saw the greed. They saw the stupidity. Bianca deleted the video, but it was too late. The world knew the truth. She was not a victim of a hack. She was a victim of her own shopping habit, and I was just the receipts. The ringtones in the Otis family mansion used to sound like a melody of popularity. They were the sounds of party invitations, social media notifications, and eager friends wanting a piece of the spotlight. But by Wednesday afternoon, the sound had changed. It was no longer a melody. It was a siren. The phones rang relentlessly, overlapping in a chaotic dissonance that echoed through the high ceilings of the Buckhead estate. And for the first time in history, nobody wanted to answer them. My father sat at the expansive marble kitchen island. He was not eating. He was staring at a stack of thick, heavy envelopes that had been delivered by a grim-faced courier just an hour ago. They were not fan mail. They were lawsuits. The logo on the top letterhead was the smiling arrow of Amazon. But the text below it was not smiling. It was a formal declaration of breach of contract. Bianca walked into the kitchen. She looked like a ghost. Her makeup was gone, and she was wearing sweatpants, dragging her feet across the floor. She picked up the letter from Amazon and read the bold text. "Plaintiff seeks immediate restitution for the total loss of perishable inventory." She read, her voice trembling. "Due to the negligence of Otis Logistics and the failure of climate control systems, the plaintiff claims damages in the amount of $12 million. She dropped the paper. It fluttered to the floor like a dead leaf. She reached for the next one. It was from Walmart. "Failure to meet supply chain obligations," she whispered. "Damages estimated at $8 million. She looked up at our father. "Daddy, that is $20 million. We do not have $20 million. You said we had insurance." Desmond looked up. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked 10 years older than he had the day before. "Insurance covers accidents, Bianca," he said, his voice raspy and defeated. "Insurance covers acts of God. It does not cover acts of stupidity. It does not cover gross negligence. It does not cover a CEO who turns off the air conditioning to save money for an ice sculpture." The insurance company sent a letter too. "They are voiding our policy. They are not paying a cent." Bianca slumped into a chair. She felt the room spinning. $20 million. It was a number so big it felt abstract. It was not real money. It was a death sentence. But the worst was yet to come. The landline on the wall, a phone that rarely rang, began to trill. It was a harsh, mechanical sound. My mother, Patricia, picked it up with a shaking hand. She listened for a moment, her face turning the color of ash. She did not say goodbye. She just hung up the phone and leaned against the wall for support. "Who was that?" Desmond asked, though he already knew. "It was the bank," Patricia whispered. "First National. They saw the news. They saw the stock price. Otis Logistics is trading at 4 cents a share, Desmond. The company is officially classified as junk status." So Desmond asked, bracing himself. "So they are calling in the loans," Patricia sobbed. "All of them. The business loans. The lines of credit. And because the company has no value left, they are seizing the collateral to cover the debt." Bianca looked around the kitchen. She looked at the imported Italian stove. She looked at the chandelier that cost more than a Honda Civic. "What collateral?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Everything," Patricia cried, sliding down the wall to the floor. "The warehouse, the trucks, and this house. They are foreclosing on the estate, Bianca. We have 30 days to vacate the premises. They are taking the cars. They are taking the furniture. They are taking it all." Bianca stood up. She ran to the window and looked out at the driveway. Her white Range Rover was sitting there gleaming in the sun. It was her pride and joy. It was the symbol of who she was, and now it was just an asset on a bank spreadsheet. "No," she screamed, grabbing her hair. "They cannot take my car. I need that car. People know me by that car." Desmond laughed. It was a dry, bitter sound. "You do not have a car, Bianca," he said. "You do not have a house. You do not have a company. We are not just broke. We are ruined. We are going to be lucky if we can afford a rental apartment in the suburbs." Bianca looked at her parents. She looked at the luxury that surrounded her, realizing for the first time that it was all just borrowed scenery. She had played the part of the queen, but the stage was being dismantled, plank by plank. She had spent her inheritance on rose gold paint, and now she did not even have enough money to buy the solvent to scrape it off. The empire had not just fallen, it had been repossessed. Rats are always the first to leave a sinking ship. They do not wait for the water to reach their necks. They smell the damp air and they run. Preston was not a captain. He was a passenger who had only stayed for the open bar. And now that the bar was closed and the orchestra had stopped playing, he was packing his bags. The master bedroom was quiet. The afternoon sun filtered through the silk curtains, casting long shadows across the floor that would soon belong to the bank. Preston moved with a frantic, nervous energy. He was not folding clothes. He was looting. He had a duffel bag open on the bed, and he was filling it with the only things he actually loved. He went to the wall safe hidden behind the oil painting of Bianca. He punched in the code, 1234. He had never bothered to change the factory setting because he never thought anyone would dare to rob him. He was the robber now. The heavy steel door swung open. Inside were the last remnants of the Otis family liquid assets. There were stacks of cash meant for the household staff. There were bearer bonds. And there were the jewels. Preston did not hesitate. He swept the contents of the velvet trays into his gym bag. The heavy gold Patek Philippe watch went first, then the diamond tennis bracelet Bianca wore on their wedding day, then the sapphire ring that had belonged to her grandmother. He did not look at the wedding photo on the nightstand. He did not look at the life they had built. He only looked at the gold. To him, these were not memories. They were survival currency. He knew the lawsuits were coming. He knew the accounts would be frozen by morning. He needed to be in the Cayman Islands before the sun came up. He zipped the bag shut. The sound was harsh in the silent room. He took one last look around. He felt no guilt. He felt only the desperate, selfish urge to survive. He pulled a single sheet of paper from his pocket. It was a standard divorce petition he had printed off the internet an hour ago. He placed it on Bianca's vanity table right next to her empty jewelry box. He grabbed a tube of her expensive red lipstick and uncapped it. On the mirror, he scrawled a message in jagged crimson letters. I cannot live with a bankrupt person. Good luck. He walked out the back door without looking back. The roar of his engine fading down the driveway was the sound of the final betrayal. 10 minutes later, Bianca walked into the house. She looked like a shell of a human being. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Her feet dragged on the marble floor. She wanted Preston. She wanted him to hold her and tell her that it was all a bad dream. She wanted him to tell her that he had a plan. Preston, she called out, her voice weak and trembling. Baby, are you home? I need you. There was no answer. The house felt hollow. It felt dead. She walked up the stairs, gripping the banister for support. She pushed open the door to the bedroom. Preston, she whispered. She saw the open safe first. The black, gaping hole in the wall looked like a wound. She ran over to it, falling to her knees. It was empty. The cash was gone. The diamonds were gone. Everything of value had been stripped away. Then she saw the mirror. The red lipstick looked like blood. She read the words. I cannot live with a bankrupt person. She looked down at the table and saw the divorce papers. The signature line was already signed. The air left her lungs. She did not scream immediately. She just stared at the paper, unable to process the cruelty. He had not just left her. He had robbed her. He had taken the last safety net she had and cut it loose. He had loved the money, not the woman, and now that the money was gone, so was he. A sound built up in her chest. It started as a low whimper and grew into a howl of pure, unadulterated agony. She grabbed the perfume bottles from the vanity and threw them at the mirror. Glass shattered everywhere. She screamed until her throat bled. She curled up on the rug, surrounded by the wreckage of her life, and wept. She was alone, truly, completely alone. And for the first time, she realized that the poverty she was afraid of was not just about money. It was about love. And she was the poorest woman in the world. The grand living room of the Buckhead estate had always been a stage for the performance of wealth. It was designed for galas, for charity auctions, and for impressing people who only cared about net worth. But on this Wednesday afternoon, the audience was gone. The silence was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the frantic tapping of Patricia's manicured fingernails against the glass screen of her phone. She sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, her posture rigid, a desperate smile plastered on her face, as if the person on the other end of the line could see her trying to hold the crumbling walls of her life together. She was working her way down the list of her contacts. These were the women she had lunched with for 30 years, the women she had vacationed with in the Alps, the women she called her inner circle. Catherine, darling. Patricia chirped into the phone, her voice pitching up an octave to mask the tremor of panic. It is Patricia. Yes, it has been ages. Listen, I hate to be a bother, but Desmond and I are in a bit of a temporary bind with some liquid assets due to the bank transition. It is just a clerical error, really. We were wondering if we could arrange a small short-term bridge loan, just $50,000. We would pay you back double next week when the accounts unfreeze. There was a pause on the line. It was the kind of silence that felt like a slap in the face. Patricia Catherine's voice came back cold and sharp as a diamond. We saw the news. We saw the video of your son-in-law smashing the computers. We know the company is trading at pennies. My husband says you are toxic assets right now. Please do not call this number again. It is embarrassing for both of us. The line went dead. Patricia stared at the phone in disbelief. She dialed again. Margaret. The woman whose daughter's wedding Patricia had practically paid for. The call went straight to voicemail. She dialed again. Susan. Susan picked up on the first ring. Listen to me, Patricia, she hissed. If you ask me for money, I will block you. You are ruined. Have some dignity and stop begging. Patricia dropped the phone. It landed on the Persian rug with a dull thud. She looked up at Desmond, who was pacing by the fireplace. Her face was pale, stripped of all its arrogance. They are gone, Desmond, she whispered. All of them. The dinners, the friendships. They were not friends. They were just fans of our money. And now that the show is over, they have all gone home. Desmond did not answer. He gripped the marble mantel so hard his knuckles turned white. He was trying to breathe, but the air felt like it had turned into solid concrete. A sharp, crushing pain radiated from the center of his chest, shooting down his left arm. It felt like an elephant was sitting on his ribcage. Patricia screamed, seeing him sway. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his chest. His face turned a terrifying shade of gray. It was the stress, the shame, the crushing weight of $20 million in debt pressing down on a heart that was not used to losing. Patricia scrambled to him, fumbling for her phone to dial 911. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and flashing lights. Patricia held Desmond's hand, telling him it would be okay, telling him that the doctors at St. Jude's Medical Center would fix him. They always went to St. Jude's. It was the best hospital in the city. They were VIPs there. They wheeled Desmond into the emergency intake area. Patricia ran to the front desk, slamming her hand on the counter. My husband is having a heart attack, she yelled at the receptionist. We need the private cardiac suite immediately. We need Dr. Evans. Here is his insurance card. It is the Platinum Executive Plan. She threw the gold-colored card onto the desk. It was the ultimate status symbol. It guaranteed 0 wait times and the best care money could buy. The receptionist, a young woman who looked tired and overworked, picked up the card. She swiped it through the reader. She typed something into her computer. Then she swiped it again. She frowned. Ma'am, the receptionist said, her voice flat. This card is coming up declined. Patricia froze. That is impossible. That is a corporate account. It has unlimited coverage. Try it again. I have tried it twice, the receptionist said, turning the monitor so Patricia could see. The status says terminated. Reason: non-payment of premiums by employer. Patricia felt the room spin. The company paid the insurance, but the company accounts were frozen. Jada had locked them out. The bank had seized the assets. They had not paid the bill. We do not have coverage, Patricia whispered, the reality crashing down on her. The receptionist looked at Desmond, who was groaning on the gurney. We can still treat him, ma'am, but without insurance I cannot admit him to the private suite. You will have to provide a credit card for a deposit, or he will be triaged in the general ward. Patricia opened her purse. She looked at her wallet. Every credit card she owned was maxed out or frozen. She had $40 in cash. We cannot pay, she said, her voice trembling with humiliation. The receptionist nodded sympathetically, but pointed toward the crowded waiting room. Then he goes to the general queue. We will stabilize him, but you have to wait your turn like everyone else. Patricia walked back to the gurney. She watched as they wheeled Desmond not to a private room with a view, but into a curtained bay in the loud, chaotic hallway. She sat down on a hard plastic chair next to a man who was coughing violently. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. It smelled of antiseptic and misery. For 60 years they had bought their way out of discomfort. They had bought their way out of waiting. Now, sitting in the plastic chair, stripped of their gold cards and their titles, they were finally just like everyone else. And it was the most terrifying feeling in the world. The iron gates of the Buckhead estate were designed to keep out paparazzi and door-to-door salesmen. They were 12 feet high and reinforced with steel. But they were never designed to hold back the collective fury of 500 men and women who had lost their livelihoods. The mob did not arrive with torches and pitchforks. They arrived with work boots and tire irons and cartons of eggs that had been sitting in the sun. The noise was the first thing that hit the house. It was a low, rumbling chant that vibrated through the foundation. Pay us now. Pay. Pay us now. It was a rhythm of pure desperation. These were drivers who had mortgages. They had children who needed braces. They had insulin prescriptions to fill. And for the first time in the company's history, their paychecks had bounced. A loud splat echoed against the front window of the living room. Then another, and another. The pristine white stucco of the mansion was being bombarded. Rotten eggs, brown and foul-smelling, exploded against the facade. The smell of sulfur and decay began to seep through the ventilation seals. It was the smell of a rebellion. Bianca was not standing on the balcony to address her troops. She was not live-streaming. She was crawling on her hands and knees across the floor of the master bedroom, terrified that a silhouette in the window would make her a target. A brick crashed through the downstairs window, shattering the glass. The screaming grew louder. "Come out here, Bianca!" A voice bellowed from the driveway. It sounded like Miller. "Come tell my kids why we cannot buy groceries this week." Blue and red lights flashed against the ceiling as the police finally arrived. Sirens wailed, cutting through the chanting. But the police were outnumbered. 2 patrol cars against an army of furious truckers was not a fair fight. The officers shouted through megaphones, ordering the crowd to disperse, but the crowd was not listening. They were surging against the fence, shaking the metal bars until the hinges groaned. Bianca scrambled into the master bathroom and locked the door. It was a room made of Italian marble and gold fixtures, a sanctuary of wealth. But now it felt like a prison cell. She curled up in the bottom of the dry bathtub, pulling the shower curtain over her head, as if it could shield her from the reality outside. She was shaking so violently her teeth chattered. She pulled her phone from her pocket. Her hands were slippery with sweat. She did not dial the police. She did not dial her husband, who was probably halfway to the Caribbean by now. She dialed the only person who had the power to stop the noise. She dialed Jada. The phone rang. 1 ring, 2 rings. Bianca held her breath, praying to a god she had ignored for years. The call connected. There was no greeting, just the sound of typing in the background. "Jada." Bianca sobbed, her voice hysterical. "You have to help me. They are outside. They are throwing bricks. They are going to kill me." She pressed the phone against her ear, tears streaming down her face, ruining the silk of her dress. "Please, Jada," she begged. "I am scared. I am so scared. The police cannot stop them. There are too many of them. You have to pay them. Please just pay them. I will sign whatever you want. I will give you the house. I will give you the clothes. Just make them go away." She listened to the silence on the other end, waiting for her big sister to step in, waiting for the safety net she had always relied on. "They are breaking down the gate," Jada Bianca screamed as a loud crash echoed from the driveway. "I do not want to die in a bathtub. Please save me. I am sorry. I am so sorry for everything. Just save me." I held the phone a few inches away from my ear. Even at that distance, Bianca's screams were sharp enough to cut glass. She was begging. She was bargaining. She was offering me the keys to a kingdom that had already burned to the ground. She sounded like a child who had broken a vase and wanted her big sister to hide the pieces before Mommy got home. But Mommy and Daddy were part of the problem, and I was done hiding the pieces. "Jada, please," she wailed. "I will sign the deed over. I will give you the rose gold trucks. Just tell them to stop." I looked out the window of the Nexus Tower. The city lights were blurring in the rain. I felt a flicker of something in my chest. It was not pity. It was the old instinct, the muscle memory of a lifetime spent fixing their mistakes. The urge to type a command, transfer the funds, and make the scary noises go away. It would be so easy. I could end her terror in 10 seconds. But then I looked at the other monitor. I saw the video of Preston smashing my server. I saw the interview where they called me a failure. I remembered the movers throwing my clothes into garbage bags. No, Bianca, I said. My voice was low and steady. What do you mean no? She screamed. They are going to hurt me. They are not going to hurt you, I said. They are just loud because they are scared. They have families to feed and you spent their grocery money on a handbag. But you can fix it, she sobbed. You always fix it. That is the problem, Bianca, I said. I spent my whole life being the janitor for this family. I cleaned up your bad grades. I fixed your computer crashes. I balanced Dad's books when he made bad investments. I stayed in the shadows and kept the machine running so you could all play pretend in the sunlight, but you fired the janitor. Remember, there was silence on the line except for her jagged breathing. This is what the job is, I continued. Being a CEO is not about ribbons and parties. It is about facing the mob when the checks bounce. It is about taking responsibility. You wanted the title? You wanted the big chair? Well, you are sitting in it. This is the weight you asked for. I cannot do it, she whispered. I know, I said. I moved my thumb to the red end call button. Goodbye, Bianca. I tapped the screen. The line went dead. The silence returned to my office, but it did not feel empty. It felt clean. I had cut the anchor. I spun my chair around to the main console. Leo, my COO, was standing in the doorway watching me. He looked worried. That was cold, Jada, he said softly. It was necessary, I replied. I am done saving the Otis name, but I am not done with the people who actually built it. I pulled up the employee database for Otis Logistics. I had the contact information for every single driver, mechanic, and warehouse worker. 532 names. These were good men and women. They were the ones who had been loyal to my grandfather. They were the ones standing outside that mansion in the rain, not because they were violent, but because they were desperate. I opened the Nexus Flow hiring portal. Leo, I said, how fast can we onboard new contractors? Leo smiled understanding immediately. We can process digital contracts instantly. Why? I began to type. I drafted a mass text message. It was short. It was professional. And it was a lifeline. It read, This is a message from Jada Otis, CEO of Nexus Flow. We are aware of the insolvency of Otis Logistics. We are opening 500 immediate positions for drivers and fleet operators. Starting pay is 20% above your previous rate. Signing bonus included equal to 1 month of back pay. Click the link to accept. I looked at the send button. I was not saving my family. I was stealing their greatest asset, their talent. I pressed enter. On the wall monitor showing the live newsfeed from the mansion, I saw the reaction instantly. The chanting stopped. One by one, the drivers in the crowd looked down at their pockets. Phones lit up in the darkness like fireflies. I watched them read the message. I saw Miller, the lead driver, show his screen to the man next to him. I saw shoulders drop. I saw the anger drain out of the crowd, replaced by shock and then relief. They were not looking at the mansion anymore. They were looking at their futures. I had left Bianca in the bathroom, but I had just walked 500 people out of the storm. The fluorescent lights of the hospital waiting room hummed with a sound that felt like it was drilling into Patricia's skull. She sat on a hard plastic chair, her Chanel suit wrinkled and stained with coffee. Beside her, Bianca stared blankly at a vending machine, her eyes red and swollen. They had been there for 6 hours. They were not in a private suite with fresh flowers and smiling nurses. They were in the general population holding area, sandwiched between a teenager with a broken arm and an elderly man coughing into a handkerchief. Desmond was stable, but he was trapped behind a thin beige curtain in the hallway. The doctors had stabilized his heart, but without a valid credit card on file, they refused to schedule the surgery he needed to clear the blockage. The hospital administrator had been polite but firm. No payment, no procedure. The cost was $40,000. They did not even have $40. The automatic doors at the entrance slid open. Lawyer Henderson walked in. In this sea of misery and sweatpants, his tailored gray suit looked like a suit of armor. He carried a leather briefcase that looked heavy. Patricia stood up, her legs trembling. For a second, a flicker of the old arrogance returned to her face. She smoothed her skirt, hoping against hope that Henderson had found a loophole, that he had found a secret account, that he was here to save them. Mr. Henderson. Patricia breathed, rushing toward him. Thank goodness. Did you speak to the bank? Did you stop the seizure? We need to get Desmond into surgery. Please tell me you brought a check. Henderson did not smile. He did not offer his hand. He stopped 3 feet away from her, maintaining a professional sanitary distance. He looked at Bianca, who hadn't even looked up. Then he looked at Patricia with eyes that held no pity, only the cold weight of facts. The bank has finalized the foreclosure, Patricia Henderson said, his voice low enough that the other patients couldn't hear, but loud enough to crush her. The locks on the Buckhead estate were changed an hour ago. The security codes have been wiped. Your personal vehicles have been towed. The assets of Otis Logistics have been fully liquidated to cover the outstanding loans. Patricia grabbed his lapel. But what about us? Where do we sleep tonight? What about my husband? He is dying behind that curtain. Henderson gently removed her hand from his suit. He walked over to a small laminate table and placed his briefcase on it. The click of the latches opening sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. He pulled out a single thick document bound in a blue folder. I am not here representing Otis Logistics anymore, Henderson said. That company effectively no longer exists. I am here as a messenger for the new owner of the debt. He opened the folder. The first page bore the logo of Nexus Flow. Jada Bianca whispered, finally looking up. Henderson nodded. Jada has made an offer. It is a one-time offer. It expires in exactly 10 minutes. He slid the paper toward Patricia. Jada is willing to purchase the remaining shell of the company. In exchange, she will assume the outstanding liabilities with the vendors. She will pay off the Amazon lawsuit. She will settle the Walmart claim. And the house? Patricia asked, hope rising in her chest. Does she give us back the house? Henderson shook his head. No. The house is gone. The cars are gone. That is the price of the bankruptcy. However, Jada has included a humanitarian clause. He pointed to the bottom of the page. If you sign this document surrendering all remaining shares and intellectual property rights to Nexus Flow, and if you agree to a permanent non-disclosure agreement, never to speak to the press again, Jada will pay the hospital bill. She will cover Desmond's surgery and 3 days of recovery. Patricia stared at the paper. It was a deal with the devil, but the devil was her own daughter. And after that, Patricia asked, tears streaming down her face. What happens to us after 3 days? Henderson closed his briefcase. After that, you are on your own. Jada has arranged for a one-way rental truck to take your personal effects to a storage unit. She suggests you look for housing in a more affordable tax bracket. He handed Patricia a pen. It was a heavy, expensive Mont Blanc. Sign it, Patricia. Or Desmond does not get the surgery. Patricia looked at the curtain where her husband lay. She looked at Bianca, who was broken. She realized they had no leverage. They had no cards. They were not the main characters of this story anymore. They were just the wreckage left behind. She took the pen. Her hand shook violently as she scratched her name on the line. She was signing away her pride, her legacy, and her life. But she was buying a heartbeat. Henderson took the document back instantly. He checked the signature. Transaction complete, he said. He walked to the nurse's station and slapped a corporate credit card on the counter. Run it for the surgery, he told the nurse. The platinum plan. Patricia sank back into the plastic chair. She had saved her husband, but she had lost everything else. And as Henderson walked out of the sliding doors, she realized that Jada hadn't even bothered to come herself. They weren't worth the trip. The sterile air of the recovery room smelled of iodine and regret. Thanks to the emergency payment my lawyer had made, Desmond had been moved to a private suite, but the luxury could not hide the reality of the situation. He lay in the hospital bed looking small and gray against the white sheets. Wires and tubes snaked out from under his gown, connecting him to machines that beeped in a steady, rhythmic reminder that his heart was running on borrowed time. Patricia sat in the corner, her face stripped of makeup, holding a cup of lukewarm cafeteria coffee. Bianca was staring out the window at the parking lot, looking like a child who was waiting for a ride that was never coming. I walked into the room. I did not knock. I did not bring flowers. I did not bring a get-well-soon balloon. I carried a thin leather portfolio under my arm. My heels clicked against the linoleum floor, a sharp, authoritative sound that made everyone jump. Desmond opened his eyes. When he saw me, a flicker of hope crossed his face, followed immediately by shame. He tried to sit up, but the effort made him wince. "Rest, Desmond," I said, my voice devoid of any daughterly warmth. "You need your strength to hold a pen." I walked to the bedside table and pushed aside the plastic pitcher of water. I opened the portfolio and laid a single document on the tray. It was not thick. It was one page. Simple, direct, brutal. Patricia stood up, her hands trembling. "Jada." She started, her voice cracking. "Thank you for the surgery. We were so scared. We didn't know who else to turn to." I ignored her. I looked at my father. "We have a loose end to tie up," I said. "Henderson told you I was buying the company. This is the official transfer of ownership." Desmond looked at the paper. His eyes scanned the legal text. He squinted at the purchase price listed in bold font at the bottom. $1, he wheezed. His face flushed with a dangerous color. "You are offering me $1 for my life's work, for 50 years of blood and sweat. This is an insult, Jada. It is a mockery." I reached into my purse. I pulled out a single crisp $1 bill. George Washington stared back at me. I smoothed it out and placed it on top of the contract. "It is not an insult," I said calmly. "It is arithmetic. Otis Logistics currently has $20 million in liabilities. You have lawsuits from Amazon and Walmart. You have 500 angry drivers demanding back pay. You have a foreclosed warehouse and a fleet of trucks that are legally bricks. The company is not worth zero, Desmond. It is worth -$20 million. I tapped the dollar bill. "This dollar is a gift. It is more than the company is worth. By signing this, you are not selling me an asset. You are selling me your disaster. I am agreeing to absorb the debt. I am agreeing to pay the drivers. I am agreeing to make sure you do not go to prison for fraud." Bianca turned away from the window. Her eyes were dull. "Just sign it, Daddy," she whispered. "Just let it go." Desmond looked at his daughter, then back at me. He saw the truth. He had no leverage. He had no cards left to play. "There are conditions," I added, my voice hardening. "Conditions?" Patricia asked. I pointed to the second paragraph. Clause 4. The exit strategy. "Upon receipt of this payment and the settlement of your personal medical debts, the three of you will agree to a permanent non-compete clause. You will never work in the logistics or transportation industry again. Not as consultants. Not as board members. Not as drivers." I paused, letting the next part sink in. "And you will relocate. You have 30 days to leave the state of Georgia. I do not want to see you at charity galas. I do not want to see you in the local news. I am buying the company, but I am also buying your absence. You are leaving Atlanta, and you are never coming back." Patricia gasped. "This is our home, Jada. All our friends are here." "Your friends stopped returning your calls 3 days ago," I reminded her. "There is nothing for you here but shame and debt. I suggest Florida, or perhaps a quiet trailer park in Alabama." Desmond looked at the ceiling. A single tear leaked from the corner of his eye and ran into his ear. He realized that this was not a negotiation. It was an eviction. He was being exiled from his own kingdom by the daughter he had underestimated his entire life. "Give me the pen," he whispered. I handed him the heavy gold pen he had given me for my high school graduation. The one he told me to use when I eventually worked for him. He signed his name with a shaky hand. The signature was weak, barely legible. It was the signature of a defeated man. I took the paper back. I checked the ink. Then I picked up the dollar bill and tucked it into the pocket of his hospital gown. Transaction complete, I said. I turned around and walked to the door. I did not look back. I did not say goodbye. I had a company to rebuild, and I had a lot of rose gold paint to scrape off my trucks. The ink on the contract was not even dry before the reality began to set in. My mother, Patricia, was reading the fine print of the relocation clause, and her face went from pale to a translucent white. She looked up at me with eyes that were wide with a childlike panic. She did not care about the company. She did not care about the trucks. She cared about the address. Jada, wait. Patricia stammered, her hands gripping the edge of the hospital bed sheet. I understand we have to leave the industry. I understand we have to step down. But the house, the Buckhead estate, you cannot take that. It has been in the family for 3 generations. My garden club meets there next week. All my clothes are in the dressing room. She reached out and tried to grab my hand, her fingers cold and desperate. Let us keep the house, Jada, she begged. We will live quietly. We will stay in the guest wing. Just do not make us leave our home. I stepped back, pulling my hand away. I did not feel triumph. I felt only exhaustion. They still did not understand the math. They still thought this was a negotiation. The house is not yours, Mother, I said, my voice flat. It belongs to the creditors. I liquidated the estate this morning at 9 o'clock. The proceeds are going directly to Amazon to settle the spoilage lawsuit. If I had not sold it, the bank would have seized it, and you would be facing criminal charges for bankruptcy fraud. Patricia let out a strangled sob. Sold. You sold it? But where will we go? We cannot live on the street. I reached into my portfolio again and pulled out a small silver key attached to a plastic yellow tag. I placed it on the bedside table next to the signed contract. You are not going to the street, I said. I have arranged housing for you. It is a 2-bedroom apartment in the Pine Creek complex in Stone Mountain. It is clean, it is safe, and the rent is paid for 6 months. Stone Mountain? Patricia shrieked. That is the suburbs. That is an hour away from the city. I cannot live in an apartment. I have never lived in an apartment. What about the staff? What about the cook? There is no staff, I said, cutting her off. There is a kitchen. You will learn how to use it. It is a fresh start, Mother. You wanted a simple life free of stress. Now you have it. Desmond was lying back against the pillows, listening to his wife crumble. He looked at the ceiling, then he looked at me. For the first time in years, he really looked at me. He saw the way I stood. He saw the way I controlled the room. He saw the absolute lack of hesitation in my eyes. He looked at Bianca, who was still sobbing by the window, useless and broken. Then he looked back at me. I was the one who had built the code. I was the one who had secured the network. And I was the one who had ruthless efficiency to save the family name by amputating the family members. He let out a low, wheezing laugh that turned into a cough. We were so blind, Desmond whispered. His voice was raspy but clear. Patricia looked at him. What are you talking about, Desmond? Do something. She is sending us to a slum. Desmond shook his head slowly. Shut up, Patricia, he said tiredly. Just shut up. Do you not see it? He pointed a shaking finger at me. We spent 20 years grooming the wrong horse, Desmond said. We gave Bianca the lessons. We gave her the spotlight. We gave her the keys. We thought she was the heir because she looked the part. She looked like a princess. He took a deep breath, wincing at the pain in his chest. But we forgot that a kingdom needs a king. It needs a killer. And Jada is the only one in this room with ice in her veins. He looked me in the eye. There was no love in his gaze, but there was a newfound respect. It was the respect of a defeated general handing over his sword. You are the true heir, Jada, he said softly. You are exactly like me. God help you. He picked up the pen again. He did not hesitate this time. He scratched his signature on the final page of the transfer agreement. He dropped the pen. It rolled across the table and fell to the floor with a final click. It is done, Desmond said, closing his eyes. Get out of my room. And take your $1 with you. I picked up the contract. I checked the signature one last time. It was valid. The transfer was complete. I did not say thank you. I did not say I love you. I simply nodded, turned on my heel, and walked out of the hospital room, leaving them to the silence of their new life. I had a company to run. Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport was a chaotic sea of travelers, but to Preston Stiles, it looked like the gates of heaven. He was standing in line at the international terminal, clutching his duffel bag so tight his knuckles were white. He wore oversized sunglasses indoors and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He thought he looked inconspicuous. In reality, he looked exactly like what he was. A man running away from a crime scene. He checked the departure board for the 10th time in 5 minutes. Flight 492 to Mexico City was on time. Boarding in 20 minutes. He let out a shaky breath and adjusted the heavy gold watch on his left wrist. It was the Patek Philippe he had taken from Desmond's safe. It felt heavy and substantial against his skin. It felt like freedom. He calculated its value in his head. $50,000 easily. Enough to live like a king on a beach in Tulum for a year while the lawyers fought over the scraps of the Otis empire. He stepped forward as the line moved. He was almost there. He was almost safe. He ran through his plan again. Land in Mexico. Exchange the cash. Sell the jewelry to a fence he knew from his college days. Disappear. He smiled to himself. They thought he was stupid. Jada thought he was just a trophy husband, but he was the one walking away with the retirement fund. Mr. Stiles, a voice boomed over the hum of the terminal. Preston froze. He did not turn around. He just stared at the TSA agent checking passports ahead. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe there was another Mr. Stiles. Preston Stiles. The voice repeated closer this time. He spun around. 2 men in dark suits were cutting through the line of travelers. They were moving with purpose. Behind them were 4 uniformed police officers. They were looking right at him. Preston panic spiked. He looked at the gate. It was 50 feet away. He looked at the agents. He made a split-second decision. A stupid decision. He dropped the bag and ran. He made it about 3 steps before a heavy hand grabbed the back of his designer hoodie. He was yanked backward with such force that his feet left the ground. He slammed into the hard terrazzo floor. The air left his lungs in a painful whoosh. His sunglasses skittered across the tiles. "Get off me!" Preston screamed, thrashing against the weight of the officer on his back. "Do you know who I am? I am a victim here. I am an American citizen. You cannot touch me." The officer did not care. He grabbed Preston's wrists and wrenched them behind his back. The cold steel of handcuffs bit into his skin. Preston Stiles, the agent in the suit, said, standing over him, "You are under arrest for grand larceny, embezzlement, and flight to avoid prosecution. You have the right to remain silent." Preston struggled, his face pressed against the dirty floor. "How did you find me?" he spat. "I used cash. I ditched my phone. You cannot track me." The agent crouched down. He reached out and tapped the face of the gold Patek Philippe watch on Preston's wrist. "You can thank your sister-in-law for this," the agent said with a dry smile. "Ms. Otis informed us that this watch was a gift she gave to her father 5 years ago. Apparently, Desmond Otis has a habit of wandering off, so Jada had a custom military-grade GPS tracker installed in the casing. She turned it on about 20 minutes ago. You have been broadcasting your location to every police precinct in Atlanta." Preston stared at the watch. The beautiful, expensive gold watch. It was not a trophy. It was a shackle. He had handcuffed himself the moment he put it on. He looked up. The terminal had gone quiet. Hundreds of travelers were watching. Phones were out. They were filming him. He saw a teenager live streaming the arrest on TikTok. He saw the disgust in their eyes. He wasn't the handsome executive anymore. He was just a thief in a tracksuit being dragged away like trash. The officers hauled him to his feet. "Let us go, Mr. Stiles," the agent said. "You have a long ride back to the station. And I do not think you are going to make that flight to Mexico. Preston tried to walk with dignity, but it is hard to look dignified when you are crying. He was marched past the duty-free shops and the newsstands. He saw his reflection in a glass window. He looked small. He looked pathetic. And as the automatic doors slid open to the waiting police cruiser, he realized the ultimate irony. He had smashed Jada's server to destroy her connection to the world, but it was her technology on his own wrist that had reeled him back in. The nerd had won. The bell above the door of the Gilded Cage consignment shop chimed with a cheerful, delicate sound that felt like a mockery. 2 weeks ago, Bianca Otis would have walked into this store with an entourage. She would have demanded champagne. She would have had the owner rushing from the back room to kiss her ring. But today, she walked in alone. She was wearing a trench coat and oversized sunglasses not to look chic, but to hide her swollen red eyes. She carried a large orange box in her arms, holding it tight against her chest, like it was a bomb that might explode. The shop smelled of expensive leather and judgment. Chloe, the owner, was standing behind the glass counter. Chloe used to be Bianca's friend. They had drunk mimosas together on yachts. They had shared gossip in the bathrooms of exclusive clubs. But as Bianca approached the counter, Chloe did not smile. She did not offer a hug. She simply put on a pair of white cotton gloves and waited. Bianca placed the orange box on the counter. Her hands were shaking. She lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in layers of acid-free tissue paper, was the Himalayan Birkin bag. It was made of rare crocodile skin dyed to look like snow-capped mountains. It was the holy grail of handbags. It was the bag Bianca had bought with the $25,000 stolen from the truck safety fund. It was the reason the drivers didn't get paid. It was the reason the empire fell. "I need to sell it," Bianca whispered. Her voice was raspy. "I need cash, Chloe. Today." Chloe looked at the bag. She ran a gloved finger over the textured skin. She inspected the stitching with a jeweler's loupe. She checked the date stamp. The silence in the room was suffocating. Bianca could hear the ticking of the vintage Rolex clock on the wall. Each tick was a second of her life slipping away. "It is in perfect condition," Bianca said, desperation creeping into her tone. "I only wore it once. It is worth $30,000, maybe more in this market." Chloe set the bag down. She took off the loupe and looked at Bianca with cold, hard eyes. "The market is tricky right now," Chloe said. "And honestly, the provenance of this item is a problem. Everyone knows where the money came from. It is all over the news. This bag is practically evidence. It has bad energy. My clients are superstitious. They do not want to carry a bag that bankrupted a company." Bianca felt a lump form in her throat. "It is just a bag, Chloe. It is leather. It does not have feelings. I have to pay the deposit on an apartment. I have to buy groceries for my parents. Please." Chloe tapped her manicured nails on the glass. "I can give you $4,000. Bianca gasped. She felt like she had been slapped. $4,000? Are you crazy? That is a 90% loss. That is robbery." Chloe shrugged. "It is an offer. Take it or leave it. You can try to sell it yourself online, but do you really want to put your name and address out there for the internet trolls to find? Do you want the drivers showing up at your door again?" Bianca looked at the bag. For years, she had believed that objects like this gave her value. She thought that if she held the most expensive leather, she was the most important person in the room. She had destroyed her sister's trust for this bag. She had ignored her husband's crimes for this bag. She had let her family rot for this bag. And now, staring at it under the harsh halogen lights, she realized the truth. It was just dead skin. It was just a container. It could not hug her. It could not tell her it was going to be okay. It could not buy back her reputation. It was a hollow symbol of a hollow life. She looked at Chloe, who was already bored checking her phone. Bianca realized she had no friends here. She had only customers and competitors. "I will take it," Bianca whispered. Chloe opened the register. She counted out $400 bills. She didn't put them in an envelope, she just slid them across the glass. Bianca picked up the money. It felt dirty in her hands. She watched Chloe take the bag and put it on a shelf behind the counter next to a vintage Chanel. It looked just like any other piece of merchandise. Bianca turned and walked out of the store. It had started to rain. She didn't have her umbrella. She walked to the bus stop, standing next to a woman in a nurse's uniform. The bus arrived with a screech of brakes. Bianca stepped on and paid her fare with a crumpled dollar bill. She sat in the back near the window. As the bus pulled away, she saw a billboard. It was an advertisement for Nexus Flow. It was sleek and modern. The tagline read, "The future is moving." Bianca rested her head against the cold glass and watched the city she used to rule blur into gray streaks. She was nobody now, and in the silence of the bus ride she wondered if she ever really was somebody at all. The sun rose over the distribution center, but the light looked different today. The tacky rose gold banners were gone. The disco balls were in the dumpster. The red carpet that Bianca had rolled out for her vanity project had been ripped up and replaced with fresh, clean asphalt. Above the main gate, a new sign was being welded into place. It was simple. It was industrial. It read, J.O. Logistics. There were no sparkles. There was no glitter. It was just bold steel letters that promised one thing. We deliver. I walked through the double doors of the main control room. I was not wearing a ball gown. I was not wearing heels that cost more than a car. I was wearing jeans and a black blazer. It was the uniform of someone who came to do the work, not just take the credit. The room was packed. Every desk was occupied. The skeleton crew I had brought over from Nexus Flow was mixed in with the rehired staff from the old Otis team. They stopped talking when I entered. It was a heavy, expectant silence. On the massive wall of monitors, the map of North America was lit up like a Christmas tree, but it was the wrong color. 500 red dots glowed angrily across the screen. They represented the fleet that had been paralyzed for a week. They were 500 sleeping giants waiting for a wake-up call. I walked to the main terminal. The chair was cold. The keyboard was waiting. I sat down and placed my hands on the desk. I looked at the reflection in the monitor. I didn't see the scared girl who used to hide in the server room. I saw the woman who owned the code. Leo stood next to me. All systems are primed, Jada, he said quietly. The satellite uplinks are secure. The drivers are in their cabs. They are just waiting for the signal. I nodded. I did not need a microphone. I did not need a speech about synergy or revolution. I just needed to speak the language of the machine. I brought up the command line interface. The cursor blinked, a steady rhythmic pulse. I typed the command. It was not a long string of complex algorithms. I had already done the hard coding remotely. This was just the key turning in the lock. System_restore_default. I looked at the words. Restore default. It meant going back to the way things were supposed to be. Before the greed, before the ego, before the rose gold paint. It meant going back to the function. I hovered my finger over the enter key. I took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of coffee and ozone. Let us go to work, I whispered. I pressed the key. The sound of the plastic click was the only noise in the room for a split second. Then the screen exploded with motion. The first red dot in the center of the map flickered and turned a bright, vivid green. Then 10 dots. Then 50. Then 100. It was a cascade of color, a digital wave washing over the screen. The red error messages vanished, replaced by streams of live telemetry data. Oil pressure normal, hydraulic systems active, GPS signal locked. And then came the sound. It started as a low vibration that I could feel through the soles of my shoes. It shook the water in the glass on my desk. It rattled the frames on the wall. It grew louder and deeper, a guttural roar that seemed to come from the earth itself. Outside the thick glass windows of the control tower, 500 diesel engines roared to life simultaneously. It sounded like thunder. It sounded like a dragon waking up. The exhaust stacks pumped gray smoke into the morning air, signaling that the heart of the beast was beating again. The staff in the room erupted. They didn't just clap politely. They cheered. They hugged each other. Some of the older dispatchers wiped tears from their eyes. I stood up and walked to the window. Down in the yard, the drivers were hanging out of their cabs. I saw Miller, the man who had led the protest, pumping his fist in the air. He looked up at the tower and pointed at me. Then I heard it. Even through the glass and the roar of the engines, I could hear the chant rising from the asphalt. Jada, Jada, Jada. They were not chanting for a celebrity. They were not chanting for a savior. They were chanting for their paychecks. They were chanting for their dignity. They were cheering because for the first time in a long time, the person in the big chair knew how to drive the bus. I placed my hand against the cool glass. I watched the first truck in the line release its air brakes with a sharp hiss. It pulled forward, the wheels turning smoothly. The deadlock was over. The flow had returned. I turned back to the room. The celebration was nice, but we had lost a week of productivity and time was money. "All right, everyone," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "We have 500 trucks that are late for delivery. Let us get this freight moving." I sat back down and began to type. The screen was green, the road was open, and I was just getting started. The sun was fully up now, casting a brilliant golden light over the industrial park. The air on the balcony was crisp and smelled of diesel fuel and morning dew. To most people it was just the smell of a truck stop, but to me it was the scent of victory. I stood at the railing looking down at the highway that ran parallel to the distribution center. It was a magnificent sight. 500 trucks were moving in a perfect synchronized line. They looked like a river of steel flowing out into the arteries of the country. They were carrying food to grocery stores. They were carrying medicine to hospitals. They were carrying the economy on their 18 wheels. The rose gold paint was gone, covered by the clean, honest white of the new branding. They were no longer fashion accessories. They were tools. And they were working beautifully. I reached into the inside pocket of my blazer. I pulled out a small, worn photograph. It was black and white, fraying at the edges. It showed a man in muddy work boots standing next to a single beat-up delivery van. He had a cigarette in his mouth and a look of fierce determination in his eyes. My grandfather. The original Otis. He built this with his bare hands. He dug the foundation. He drove the first routes himself. He didn't know anything about cloud computing or algorithms. He just knew that a promise made was a promise kept. My father and Bianca had forgotten that. They thought the company was a magic money machine. They forgot that the machine had to be oiled with respect. I ran my thumb over the face in the photo. "We did it, Grandpa," I whispered. My voice was lost in the wind, but I knew he heard me. It took a little demolition to fix the foundation. I had to tear down the walls to save the house. But it is standing strong now. The legacy is safe. I was not standing alone on that balcony. Behind me, the glass door slid open. Leo walked out, holding 2 cups of coffee. Behind him were Sarah, the lead systems architect, and David, the head of fleet operations. They didn't bow to me. They didn't ask me for money. They just stood there watching the trucks leave. "This is a good view," Leo said, handing me a cup. "It is the best view in the world," I replied, taking a sip. I looked at them. They were wearing hoodies and jeans. They looked tired. They had been up for 48 hours straight, rewriting code and rekeying ignition protocols. They were not my blood relatives. They did not share my last name. But as I looked at their faces, I realized I was looking at my family. My real family. The people who understood that value is built, not inherited. I put the photo back in my pocket, close to my heart. "The trucks are rolling," Leo said, checking his tablet. "Efficiency is already up 15%. The AI routing is shaving miles off every delivery. We are going to be profitable by the next quarter." I nodded. I turned my back on the view. The view was nice, but the work was inside. "Let us not get too comfortable," I said, a small smile playing on my lips. "We have a global network to optimize." I walked back into the office. The hum of the servers was a comforting song. The energy in the room was electric. I sat down at my desk. My reflection stared back at me from the black screen. I looked tired, but I looked free. I tapped the spacebar to wake the computer. The Nexus Flow logo spun for a second, a blue circle of infinite possibility. Then the dashboard loaded. The map was green. The data was flowing. And in the center of the screen, a single message blinked in crisp white letters. Future is online. I cracked my knuckles and began to type. True power is not about the noise you make, but the systems you control. Jada's victory proves that while arrogance seeks attention, competence commands respect. Her family believed that legacy was something you could simply inherit and wrap in rose gold. But they learned the hard way that you cannot gloss over a broken foundation. The ultimate leverage belongs to those who understand the mechanics of the world, not just the aesthetics. In the end, silence is the loudest form of authority, and the person holding the keys will always outlast the person standing on the stage. Stop chasing the spotlight and start building the engine. Subscribe if you are ready to let your success make the noise.